Starfinder, Misery's Company, by Tim Pratt. Chapter 1. Down and Out. Misery crawled out of an air duct and looked around the hangar bay, one of the cheapest and most cluttered on Absalom Station. She crouched behind a pile of spent energy cells and listened past the hiss of leaking hydraulic lines and the clang of someone banging on a bolt for anything that sounded worrisome. Like, say, snippets of conversation between enforcers bent on capturing her. She didn't pick up anything alarming. There were 24 ships in the bay, arrayed in uneven lines, from little one-person runabouts to bulky cargo vessels, and her own swift courier, the Up and Out, was way in the back, closest to the exit, just where she liked it. This was the kind of hangar where you had to pay your docking fees up front, so there was nothing stopping her from jumping on board, spinning up the engines, and racing out of here. Sure, coming back to the station without getting murdered on arrival would be tricky. But once she got her hands on some credits, she'd make paying back Zephyrith her first, second, at least third priority. In Misery's experience, enough credits could smooth over just about any difficulty. It was just a shame she always had more difficulties than credits lately. Once she was confident the way was clear, Misery ran across the hangar toward her ship, and was within steps of the boarding ramp when a Vesk shimmered out of some kind of stealth field and stood in her way, holding an immense wrench casually in one clawed hand. Misery stopped short, very nearly colliding with the Vesk, which would have made a bad situation even worse. She looked up and up and up into the reptilian smile. The Vesk was easily 7 feet tall, while Misery was on the short side for a human. "Smeliel, I was just looking for you. Isn't that lucky?" the Vesk enforcer rumbled. "I was looking for you too." She rapped the nose of the Up and Out with her wrench. "You weren't going to leave, were you? You have an appointment with our mutual employer, and I'm sure you don't plan to keep her waiting." Misery's smile slipped. "I don't work for Zephyrith." Misery didn't work for anyone anymore. She charted her own course, made her own choices, and didn't have to answer to anyone or answer for them either. Flying solo was better in every way, though it did mean at times like this that nobody had her back. "Zephyrith owns you, though." Smeliel crouched, bringing her closer to Misery's eye level. "Until you pay what's owed." Misery had borrowed heavily from Zephyrith to finance a heist, outfitting the Up and Out with the latest infiltration, stealth, and combat tech, all part of a plan to rob the orbital pleasure palace of a Lashunta oligarch. But it turned out her contact sold the same security system plans and station blueprints to another crew, one that managed to strike a lot faster. The prize was stolen from Misery, which meant she didn't have the capital to repay her loan, or even keep up with the eye-watering interest. "I'm going to pay," Misery said. "In fact, I was just going out to scout a new job, so I'd have good news for Zephyrith at our meeting." Smeliel turned her head and looked at the ship. "You've got everything you need on here, don't you?" Her voice was full of undisguised admiration. "I had a word with the engineers you hired. The Up and Out is a custom-built flying crime spree. Seems a shame to leave it in such ineffectual hands." Misery's guts went cold. "Smeliel, no, you can't. Half the value of that vessel comes from upgrades you made with Zeph's money," the Vesk said, as if idly musing. "The other half should pretty much cover the interest, plus a gratuity to thank my employer for not tossing you out an airlock for trying to run away today. In which case, you can just transfer the title, and we're done." Misery gritted her teeth. "You can't take my ship. She's all I've got. I poured my life into the Up and Out." Smeliel clamped an immense clawed hand on Misery's shoulder. "Then don't make me pour your life out all over this hangar deck. Did you always want to be a hired thug? Was this your childhood dream? Beating people up for a crime boss?" Misery winced at herself. Sometimes her thoughts slipped out of her mouth before she could stop them. "I'm a poet, actually," Smeliel said, grinding down on Miss Ree's shoulder. That's why I left home. Originally, my family didn't understand my dreams, but poetry doesn't pay very well. Not compared to enforcing the interests of a local entrepreneur. Sometimes you need a night job. I will say, doing this kind of work. She showed all her serrated triangular teeth. It does give me a great deal of insight into the sapient condition, and that's helpful in my art. Maybe I'll write something about you, an ode to misery. I've never heard a joke like that before, Miss Ree said. Can I at least get my stuff? You don't have any stuff, Smeliel said. You walk away with your life. And that deal is only good for the next minute or so. Transfer the title now. Miss Ree looked wistfully at the up-and-out her home, her livelihood, and practically her only friend. But you had to know when to let things go, and 2 seconds before a Vesk enforcer splits your head open with a wrench was an excellent time to do so. She tapped a command into her wrist-mounted computer and gave up her one true love. Smeliel looked at a readout on her own datapad, grunted, and said, "Good choice. I hate getting blood all over my good wrench." She made a shooing gesture. I'd say, don't let me see you on this station again. But since it's a big place, and you don't have access to a vehicle anymore, I'll settle for saying, stay out of Zephineth's club. The drinks are overpriced anyway, Miss Ree muttered. True, Smeliel said. You couldn't afford the cover charge anyway, now that I think about it. Stop loitering around my ship. Miss Ree trudged out of the hangar. At least she didn't have to sneak through air ducts and service tunnels anymore. She reviewed her assets. She still had a day left on the rental for the sleep pod where she'd been hiding out from Zephineth. She had a change of clothes in the bag strapped to her back, an ultra-thin switchblade in her pocket, and a few cred sticks squirreled away here and there on the station she'd learned early in life, not to keep everything of value in one place. That was the totality of her net worth, though. And it wasn't enough to finance any kind of comeback or fresh start. Would she be reduced to running short cons on tourists in bars? Or worse, rolling drunks and emptying their pockets? She'd never been into strong-arm robbery, and it was a dangerous proposition. She knew a guy who'd mugged a defenseless-looking human who'd turned out to have an integrated cutting torch hidden in a cybernetic arm, and everybody called the mugger Cyclops now, because he only had one eye left. But even robbery was a better option than hiring herself out to one of Zephineth's competitors, which was her only other plausible path to financial security. It was pretty easy to get a job with a crime boss when you had the kind of skills and arsum Miss Ree did. But it was really hard to quit that job if you ever wanted to move on. She turned onto a crowded thoroughfare through a gray market bazaar that filled a hub where 3 corridors intersected. She headed down an alley that led to her sleeping pod, one of 24 stacked cubbyholes, each just barely big enough to sleep in. At least her pod was on the bottom level, so she didn't have to climb a rickety ladder to reach. Miss Ree froze. The door to her cubby was ajar. In theory, it was biometrically locked to her for the duration of her rental, but there were ways to spoof the locks, or you could always just bribe the manager. Who was inside? Another of Zephineth's enforcers? One who hadn't been called off yet? She crouched beside an overflowing trash bin and watched her door swing all the way open. An android stepped out of her room, ebony-skinned with a shining bald head of some silver alloy and bright yellow eyes, wearing a slick, black overcoat. Zephanoth never employed androids. Miss Ree didn't know why, but she assumed she'd been wronged by one too many androids on her climb up the crime boss career ladder, which meant this was some other kind of trouble. The android turned his head, his stoic yellow eyes fixing immediately on her. Miss Ree Ludovis, I've been looking for you. Miss Ree ran. Chapter 2. The Radius. Miss Ree didn't have much in the way of friends anymore she used to. And look how that worked out. But she did have a few acquaintances, colleagues, and occasional co-conspirators. She clambered, crept, sidled, and dashed her way through the crowded corridors of Absalom Station, confident in her ability to stay ahead of the android nobody. With a head that shiny and a coat that clean could possibly know the seedier sections of the station, like she did. She made her way to one of her most reliable hidey holes, the Radius. A little bar built into an array of long, unused coolant and outflow pipes. The perfectly circular front entrance had a hatch that always stood open, any hour of the day or night, leading to the main bar. But deeper inside there were tunnels that led to a variety of chambers you could rent by the hour, day, or week, and purchase total discretion from the owner as part of the price, said owner and regular bartender, was a Shireen T-Shell who greeted Miss Ree warmly. Hello, little sorrow. Come, I've invented a new cocktail. You have to try it. Only half price. Most of the drinking establishments down in the Spike only offered a couple of options: get drunk slow or get drunk fast, with a side of potential organ damage, but the Radius was different. Like all Shirens, T-Shell reveled in the joy of personal autonomy and making small choices, and as a result, she had the most ridiculously well-stocked bar in the packed worlds. Her life's work was acquiring liquors, liqueurs, syrups, tinctures, infused spirits, mixers, and other potables to tempt the taste of any sapient species that might conceivably pass through Absalom Station. She used that vast library of liquids to concoct new recipes, in order to share the delight of ever-expanding choice to all her patrons. Miss Ree looked back at the front door, and decided she could spare a moment to be polite. This won't knock me out, will it? I've got some problems I need to deal with, and they'd benefit from a clear head. Perfect. I call this one unearned clarity. T-Shell placed a metal cup before her. Eye-watering vapors drifted up from the surface. It's a combination of purple death lotus extract and castrovellian liqueur with a microdose infusion of noetic enhancers and some soda water to give it fizz. Miss Ree picked up the cup, gave it a sniff, then took a cautious sipage she swallowed, then put the cup back down, closer to the bartender than herself. Wow, T-Shell. You can really taste the death lotus. The Shiren chuckled. You have such unrefined tastes, little sorrow. Why did you come here, if not to drink? I need to get out of sight for a couple days, on credit. If you'd be so kind, you know I'm good for it. I was thinking maybe the room with all the signs that say danger radiation on the hatch. Nobody likes to go in there. Chell's mandibles clashed. Who are you running from? You know I can't hide you from Zephanith. She's one of my investors. No, that's all settled, but there's this android. Oh, he found you? T-Shell said. Miss Ree froze. You know him? Shell shrugged. Someone at the end of the bar hollered for service, and T-Shell held up a hand to say, Wait, I don't know him, but he was looking for you. Did you tell him where to find me? Of course not. All my patrons value their privacy. Besides, even if I wanted to give you up, it's not like I know where to find you at any given moment. That's true, Miss Ree said. He bought a lot of drinks for a lot of regulars, though, T-Shell said. I can't promise my patrons exercised as much discretion as I did. Miss Ree groaned. It turned out this wasn't such a safe place. After all, she came here too often, and it had become a known haunt. She looked around, considering the other customers, slumped at tables or huddled in booths, or playing the game machines in the corner. She noted a vaguely familiar-looking Isoki muttering into his wrist. Was he calling the android to report on Miss Ree and collect a reward? She had to run, but maybe she could find out something first, like, was she dealing with a bounty hunter? Or someone she'd ripped off? Or what? It was even possible this android wanted to offer her a job, but she didn't want to work for anyone else. And the kind of people who hired people like her didn't like hearing no, so it was better to avoid the question entirely. Did he say why he was looking for me? I didn't talk to him much, Tishel said, but he did say he was an associate of your Uncle Ando. Andu? Miss Ree hadn't heard that name in years. He was actually her great-uncle, her grandmother's brother, and the dark star of the family, a ne'er-do-well who shirked his responsibilities, took insane risks, and broke the law with impunity. You remind me of Ando was the most vicious insult her grandmother ever spoke. And it was one Miss Ree heard a lot as a child. Ando had abandoned the family to work on a freighter headed beyond the Pact Worlds, seeking his fortune and keeping in touch only with occasional sporadic messages sent when he was within range. Miss Ree had only met Ando once, at her grandmother's funeral, when she was a teenager just a year before she got sick of her mom's rules and plans and goals, and ran away to seek her own fortune and have some fun. Ando was a big man with a white-streaked beard and a booming voice, and they'd shared only one significant interaction. She was sitting outside on the steps, sick of all the family and friends milling around inside, trying to out-sad each other, puffing on a vaporizer, when Ando lowered himself down next to her with a grunt. "Miss Ree, right?" She exhaled vapor into his face and stared at him with the dead eyes she'd been practicing. She'd always been a moody kid, and puberty hadn't improved her attitude. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Thanks for sharing, kid." He plucked the vaporizer from her fingers, took a hit, and handed it back, all before she could object. That's terrible, tastes like candy." "So, were you and my sister close?" Miss Ree shrugged. "I was her only grandchild, but I got the idea she would have traded me in for a different model if she could have." He chuckled. "I was her only brother, and I had the same feeling. She wasn't a bad person, though, Miss Ree. She just really believed, deep down, that if she stopped being perfect for even 1 second, the universe would collapse. When she was young, she decided it was her job to carry the whole world on her shoulders." Miss Ree snorted. "Not the whole world. My mom's carrying at least half the world on hers, like it would kill them to have fun every once in a while. Or at least let someone else have fun. We have proof positive that not having any fun kills you, too, eventually." Ando tilted his head toward the front door, where the memorial gathering was still ongoing. "Listen, when you're a little older, if you want to see what the galaxy has to offer, look me up. Maybe I can help Paige. Aren't you, like, a deckhand on some rust bucket?" He grinned. "I see my legend precedes me. I started out that way. Sure, I would have taken a job as an apprentice sewage strainer, as long as it got me out of here. But the intervening years have been good to me. And these days, I own my very own rust bucket. I'd give you a job as a deckhand on that, though, if you wanted." "Whatever." Miss Ree stood up and walked away. At the time, he seemed like just another meddling relative, even if he was meddling in a different direction than the rest. She'd never reached out to Ando, even at her most desperate, because after suffering under her mother and grandmother's orders for her entire life, why would she want to put herself under the authority of another family member? But now, a decade later, Ando was looking for her? Or, no. Someone who claimed to know Ando was looking for her. For all she knew, he wanted to kidnap her to get a ransom out of the old man or something. She tossed a cred stick on the bar for the sip of drink, and because it paid to stay friends with T-Shell, and turned to the door. The Isoki started to get up and follow her, so once again, Miss Ree ran. This time, though, when she rushed through the front hatch, she bumped right into the shiny-headed android, who wrapped her in implacable arms and said, "Hello, Miss Ree." Chapter 3. The Broken Mirror. "Your Uncle Ando sends his fondest regards," the android said. Miss Ree stomped on his instep, then kneed him in the crotch, and neither had any effect at all. She went limp then, hoping the sudden shift in her weight would prompt him to drop her, but that didn't work either. "Are you finished?" he said. "I have a message for you, and a bequest. and I would prefer to deliver them without physically restraining you throughout our interaction. Then let me go. Her voice was muffled, because her head was still squished against his smooth, hard chest. The Isoki popped out of the bar. I got a private nook reserved for you in here, boss. Will you allow me to buy you a drink, Miss Ri, and explain my presence? The android's voice was smooth and mellow, and she distrusted him instantly. Though to be fair, that was how she reacted to basically everyone. Miss Ri considered her options. She had even fewer at the moment than usual. Fine. The android released her, but she could tell he was more than capable of snagging her if she dashed again. So she went back into the radius. They followed the ratfolk informant to the back, ducking into the nest of overlapping pipes and navigating rounded corridors until they reached a little curtained-off nook with sonic bafflers in the walls to ensure private communication. The Isoki pulled the curtain aside, revealing a booth with a curved bench seat wrapped around a scuffed table. The Isoki gestured, and Miss Ri slid in. The android sat on the other side, and then the rat dropped the curtain, but he was probably hanging around outside in case Miss Ri made a run for it again. The android looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. My name is BR10. People usually call me Brio. Miss Ri just looked at him. There was seldom any advantage in volunteering information. Are you always so hostile toward people trying to deliver things to you? He said. Do you flee when someone tries to hand you a package? Slap envelopes out of people's hands and kick them in the shins? Unfortunately, being silent just encouraged him to talk, it seemed, so she decided to move him along. People who come looking for me aren't usually trying to give me anything. They want to take things. What do you want with me, Brio? I come bringing sad news. Your great Uncle Ando has died. Miss Ri looked within herself for a twinge of sadness and was surprised to actually find a small one. She hadn't known Ando, really, but the stories about him had been a sort of inspiration to her, showing her life didn't have to begin and end on Absalom Station. He'd also once tried to be kind to an ill-tempered kid on a hard day, and she suspected the galaxy was a less interesting place without him. I'm sorry to hear that. As are all of us who knew him, Brio said solemnly. Is that all you came to tell me? Miss Ri said. Indeed not. There are simpler ways to notify someone of a relative's passing. I handled various business affairs for your great uncle, and I am here to discharge the last of my duties to his estate. As you were his, quote, favorite niece, he has named you his sole inheritor. Of course, you are in fact his only. Wait, she interjected. I'm getting money? She'd spent the morning running away from money? Her instincts needed serious recalibration. Paying off Ando's various debts consumed much of his estate's liquid assets. But your inheritance does include a fair sum. He glanced at the dirty curtain and scuffed table. Actually, from your current position, I imagine the sum will seem rather more than fair. The main part of the estate, however, is your uncle's remaining property, which you are free to keep or sell as you prefer. What? I get his old furniture? Stacks of ancient holodiscs? Taxidermied pets? She waved her hand. Sell it all and transfer the credits to me. Brio shook his head. Most of his possessions were bestowed upon others, given to charity, or destroyed, per the terms of his will. Only 2 items of note have been passed on to you. His home, Zartyka, an asteroid in the diaspora, and his starship, the Broken Mirror. When Smeliel took the up and out away from Miss Ri, a black hole had opened at the center of her being. That hole closed itself up now. She was going to have a ship again, freedom again, the stars again. The rust bucket, Miss Ri murmured. He told me he had his own ship. Brio stiffened, and he was pretty stiff to begin with. I beg your pardon. Broken Mirror is no rust bucket. Andu purchased a fine Vanguard Explorer and extensively customized it, improving significantly on its already admirable baseline specs. Even better, Misri said. Is the ship here? When can I take it? You are as headlong and precipitous as Ando, I see, Brio said. Yes, the ship is on the station. I'll take you to see it. The android slid out of the booth, and Misri hurried along after him, almost chasing him, this time. They took one of the fast lifts, rising out of the slums of the Spike toward the Eye, the glorious central dome of the station, where the rich people could pretend they were on the surface of a lush planet, strolling through parks and basking in artificial full-spectrum light. They weren't headed for the gardens or grand buildings, though. They got off just below the Eye and hopped on a tram that carried them along one of the station's radial arms, toward a set of rather posh docking bays, a far cry from the kind of places Miss Ree usually did business. Those were dark and dirty metal boxes held together by epoxy and ugly blobs of solder. But here, the corridors were clean, the metal bright and polished, and there were ornamental vines climbing up the walls. Miss Ree inhaled and imagined she could detect the difference between air sweetened by oxygen-producing plants and the stuff pumped down to the vents in the Spike. A section of wall slid aside when Brio approached, and they stepped into the hangar. There were various starships there, docked or being serviced courier vessels, a sleek one-seat racing pinnace, a transport that looked like it was made of blown glass, but Miss Ree's eyes went straight to the explorer in the corner. The broken mirror. Her ship, now. It had the simple elegance common to vessels built by the Aslanti Star Empire, but Ando had painted it a gleaming reflective silver with black accents, some zigzagging in ways that were suggestive of cracks in a mirror. As Brio had promised, the ship was customized. She noted a rotating gun turret in the belly, chain cannons on both sides, and the bump of a force projector on the nose. The cargo areas had been built out too, providing extra space for loot. Who knew what upgrades she'd find inside? It's beautiful, she said. Your eyesight is fine, at least, Brio said. Miss Ree was already making plans. The broken mirror was small enough for one person to run on her own, though if you wanted to shoot things and run the scanners more efficiently, it would be good to have help, depending on how effective the onboard computer was. She would load her meager belongings onto the ship, take off, and pore over the list of potential heists she had in her head. Some of those jobs would require additional material to pull off, and that would take operating capital. But when do I get the money? She said. Perhaps we can discuss the finer points of your uncle's dying wishes on board, Brio said, rather than standing about in the hangar bay like common mechanics. I'd think you'd be fond of mechanics, Miss Ree said. Isn't that what you androids have instead of doctors? You are entirely too much like Ando. Brio gestured, and a panel of the ship sighed open, extending a rampage so smooth, so silent. Miss Ree went bounding up the ramp into the ship. The android followed, droning on. This vessel began life in the service of the Aslanti Star Empire. Yeah, it's a void sweeper, I know. Miss Ree went into the cockpit, looking over the controls most were familiar. But there was an array of new and interesting buttons and dials that she was confident could make things explode or disintegrate in exciting ways. Built for long-range and long-term exploration, plus short-term discipline of unruly subjects. Void sweepers are designed to be unusually comfortable, at least for the core crew, since they're meant for extended journeys, but there's plenty of room to cram in surveyors and scientists, or Imperial commandos with jetpacks, depending on the job at hand. How did Ando get his hands on one of these? I was just telling that story, Brio said. Many years ago, Ando found himself stranded on a remote moon with an Imperial fleet officer, and through a complex series of misadventures, the officer came to believe he owed Ando his life. You're telling the story all wrong, Brio, a voice said from the rear of the cockpit. Miss Ree had heard it only once, but she recognized it immediately. That distinctive, booming voice belonged to her dead Uncle Ando. Chapter 4. Prerequisites. Miss Ree spun, but there was no one in the cockpit but her and Brio. Was she hallucinating? Or was this ship haunted by the ghost of her dead uncle? That would be just her luck. "Did you hear that?" she said. "Unfortunately, yes," Brio said. "Miss Ree, I'd like you to meet your ship's computer, commonly referred to as &0, beloved cyber niece." The ship boomed, voice emerging from speakers in the cockpit walls. "Welcome to the inside of my body. Why does the computer sound like my dead uncle?" The voice of Miss Ree's old ship's computer was programmed to sound like a stuffy Kasathon academic, which she'd always found hilarious. But this was just weird. Ando was exceedingly fond of the sound of his own voice, Brio said. It amused him to, as he said, talk to myself among the stars. Initially, the computer was Aslante's Star Empire standard, albeit with an overlay of Ando's vocal patterns, but over the course of decades of service. Well, you know how these computers can be. Miss Ree nodded. Most computers weren't true artificial intelligence, but they were complex voice-activated expert systems, capable of high degrees of customization, and the best ones could learn the preferences of their pilots and come to anticipate their needs. Practically speaking, that meant ship computers tended to develop quirks and personalities, of a sort that could deviate wildly from their original specs. Over time, the ship started to sound more and more like Ando. Oh, yes. Brio didn't sound happy about it. Cadences and patterns, jokes and boasts, words of dubious wisdom. It's almost like having your uncle right in the room with you, constantly. "I'm looking forward to working with you, Ms. Ree," the ship said. "We'll do great things together, assuming you meet the necessary prerequisites, of course." Brio sighed heavily. Miss Ree scowled at him. What prerequisites? There was a catch. Of course there was a catch. There was always a catch. "Your uncle was an unusual person," Brio said. "As he lay dying, and we made the last changes to his will, he told me he had unfinished business and profound regrets. He was afraid those burdens might impact him spiritually, to be frank. He worried he might linger as a ghost." Miss Ree nodded. She'd seen a ghost down in the Spike, once some worker who got crushed by a falling cargo container and occasionally materialized, howling, to attack the people hired to replace her. The owner finally had to set up some cones and sawhorses and declare that corner of the bay off limits. Nobody wants to be a ghost. To assuage his worries and to ensure he would leave mortal life unencumbered by regrets, he put certain provisions into his will. Brio sat down in the co-pilot's seat and gestured for Miss Ree to take the pilot's chair. "You will take legal possession of Ando's accounts, and the broken mirror, and his asteroid, only after successfully completing certain last requests." She sat down, vibrating with anxiety. What was the old man going to demand? That she get married, have babies, continue the family line? That she murder his enemies? Woo his long-lost love and win their heart? What do I have to do? 2 things. First, you must reassemble Ando's old crew. Second, you must complete their final unfinished mission, the mission that failed and broke apart their long fellowship page. "This is going to be so much fun," &0 said. "The old team, together again." "I work alone," Miss Ree said. Brio smiled. "Then you refuse the inheritance?" "Wait, what? No." The android stared at her, unblinking. "Then I don't understand, Miss Ree. Either you accept the terms of the inheritance, or you walk away." "Can't I? I don't know. Try to get those stupid provisions removed? You could hire a lawyer. They would have to argue against me, which means you'd need to hire a very good lawyer. There are complex jurisdictional issues in play, and most of the courts where you could plausibly pursue relief are culturally inclined to respect the last wishes of a dying sapient who was in his right mind. I don't think you'd have much success overturning his wishes, but you're welcome to try. You'd have to finance the effort on your own, though. I'd hardly release funds from the estate to undermine my own purpose. Okay. Why fight when you could pretend to agree? Fine, I accept. I'll get started right away. Where's his old crew? Once Miss Ree took the broken mirror off Absalom Station, she could go anywhere she wanted and do anything she wanted. This android lawyer could probably keep her from accessing the old man's accounts. But, while credits were nice, the freedom of her own ship was the main thing she wanted. And with a vessel like the broken mirror, she'd be able to make money in 1,000 different ways. There are 3 crew members, Brio said. 3 remaining crew members, that is. You've already got one of us on board. He smiled at her. It was the first time she realized he'd shown any emotion at all, and Miss Ree was fairly certain it was a sarcastic grin. Her hopes deflated. You were part of Ando's crew? Oh, yes. Considering the activities your uncle often took part in, having someone with my diplomatic skills, who is expert in the overlapping tangle of legal jurisdictions in the Pact Worlds and beyond, was often useful to him. Plus, you've got those integrated weapons, &0 said cheerfully. It was the android's turn to glare, though glaring at an arbitrary spot on the bulkhead wall probably wasn't too effective. Those are measures of last resort, used only when diplomacy fails. So you're, staying on board with me, then, I guess, Miss Ree said. Brio nodded. Even if I weren't the 5th member of the crew, I would need to remain as executor of the will to make sure you comply with the terms. Until you complete the unfinished mission, I am the only one with access to Ando's accounts. I will provide you with enough capital to fulfill your operational needs, but no more. Miss Ree would have to go along with this ridiculous situation, at least until she saw a chance to escape with the ship, or the money, or both. She smiled. I can't wait to get started. So, where do we pick up the other 3? Brio chuckled. Pick up? It's not that simple. You have to convince my old colleagues to actually join you, and to restart a mission that nearly killed them last time. Once that's done, you have to actually complete it. Otherwise, you forfeit your inheritance, and all you get from the estate is a ride back to Absalom Station. Assuming you survive the effort. That sounds like a challenge, Miss Ree said. It sounds like an endeavor doomed to failure, but Brio shrugged. Your uncle paid me to fulfill his wishes, and fulfill them I shall. I'm confident that I'll survive, regardless. Oh, don't listen to him, &0 said. Brio is always calculating the odds. That's no way to live. If you watch for the right moment and seize it fast, you can make your own luck. Ando always said that. Ando said a lot of things, Brio said. I could do without you repeating them, ship. In fact, why don't you stop speaking unless spoken to? Am I captain here? Miss Ree broke in. Brio did blink. Finally? What? You're telling my computer when to speak, which confuses me. Who's in charge of this ship? You or me? You are, I suppose. Acting captain. The android spoke grudgingly. &0 spoke up. Ando's will says Miss Ree has full authority to organize the mission. Brio, don't you remember? I have a copy right here in my databanks. Your position is, let's see, to assist her in completing the mission to the best of your abilities, and to provide basic financial and operational oversight, which is to say, don't let her withdraw the entire balance of my account and run off or sell the ship to a salvage yard, but otherwise give her what she needs. Nothing about being acting captain or... Yes, the android said. I only meant, Miss Ree, that you are acting as captain until you take legal ownership and become permanent captain. Great, Miss Ree said. I'm captain, your crew. I'm glad we cleared that up. My first order is, tell me about the rest of Ando's old crew. If they were all as annoying as Brio, she could see why their last mission had failed, and could only wonder at how any of their earlier ones had ever succeeded. More specifically, who should we try to convince first? Who's closest? I suppose, Brio said thoughtfully, that we should begin with getting the bear out of jail. Chapter 5. Valeria. Miss Ree shivered. Do they keep it freezing in here on purpose? They sat in a windowless waiting room, the floor chilly pitted stone, the walls likewise, their chairs flimsy and uncomfortable, extruded from some cheap matter printer and used long past their optimum lifespan. You organics are so bad at temperature regulation. Brio stared into the middle distance, probably watching something on a retinal heads-up display. We're on the very edge of the Terminator, close to Darkside. It's bound to be a little chilly. But it's true. The authorities probably aren't too concerned about the comfort of their visitors, or their long-term guests. Miss Ree shifted in the chair, scowling. When you said we had to get the bear out of jail, I was picturing, I don't know, a daring prison break or something. Not using my inheritance to pay a fine and filling out stupid paperwork. I did all the paperwork, and it's still your late uncle's money for now. A prison break? Really? You'd like to begin your new life on the run from the government of Versus? Miss Ree shrugged. I always liked the sound of those outlaw kingdoms. They seem like my kind of people. The lives of those outlaws are more romantic in theory than practice, I suspect, Brio said. Those poor souls are exiled to the scorching hell of Fulbright or the glacial eternal night of Darkside. I prefer the comfort of these equatorial regions in the Ring of Nations. I always encouraged Ando to avoid breaking the law, mostly by limiting his activity to places where there barely is any law. Poor Valeria did not heed that advice, and look where she ended up. A metal door in the wall slid open, and an immense creature nearly 10 feet tall strode out, head swinging from side to side, as if scanning for threats. Miss Ree had seen uplifted beers on Absalom Station, but never up close, and proximity made a difference. The smell of the fur, the waft of her breathing, the bone-deep understanding that this bear could reach out with those nimble, clawed hands and rip Miss Ree to pieces. Miss Ree shivered, and not just from the cold. Brio, the bear growled, the word barely comprehensible, coming from a mouth not made for speech. The next words rang in Miss Ree's mind. Telepathic projection, the way most uplifted animals communicated. Took you long enough, droid. Valeria turned and banged her fist against the wall. Mine, she roared audibly. A drawer slid out of the wall, and the bear reached in and removed a chunky belt and a bandolier, draping them over her body, and adjusting them until she was satisfied with the fit. They confiscated my guns, she grumbled telepathically. At least they left me my hammer. She patted the immense metal head of a tactical maul hanging from her belt. 3 months I was in there. Brio, I didn't find out you were incarcerated until a few weeks ago, and I was a little busy, what with Ando dying, Brio said, without hint of an apology. You're welcome for the rescue, by the way. How was the old man at the end? She asked. Brio shrugged. Much the same as always. A little thing like succumbing to radiation poisoning would hardly change him. Radiation poisoning? Miss Ree had assumed Ando just died from being old. There were ways to cure radiation damage, unless the source was particularly exotic. Valeria crossed the room and loomed over Miss Ree, pretending to notice her for the first time. Who's the bite-sized stranger? Did you bring me a snack? Miss Ree stood up, though she feared it didn't make her look appreciably taller from the bear's elevated point of view. I'm Miss Ree, Ando's sister's granddaughter, Brio supplied. She looked down on Miss Ree with intelligent, dark eyes. Oh, right, the big regret. He finally got around to doing something about that. What do you mean? Miss Ree said. I barely knew Ando. What kind of regrets could he have about me? Mostly he regretted not making more of an effort to get to know you. She extended a hairy hand. Pleased to meet you. You look a little like the old man. That doesn't sound like a compliment. Miss Ree took the hand carefully. She shrugged. It's not exactly an insult. Humans mostly look the same to me. Why are you suddenly being nice instead of threatening to eat me? The bear chuckled. I only did that because I assumed you were some kind of junior lawyer working for Brio. I'm sick of lawyers. Also, I'm grouchy. I haven't had a good night's sleep in 3 months, and I miss trees. Can we get out of here? Once they were back on board the broken mirror, the computer cried out in delight. Val, you're back. Yeah. Turn your volume down, the bear growled, ducking into the cockpit and settling down on a low seat behind the co-pilot's chair. Her head still nearly brushed the ceiling. Brio muttered something about making some calls and vanished into the depths of the ship, leaving Miss Ree to handle the departure. She took the pilot's seat, made the necessary adjustments, and lifted off from the twilight majesty of the equatorial city. She didn't much mind leaving the place behind. There were more opportunities in wilder places. As they headed into orbit, she glanced back at Val. If you don't mind me asking, what were you in for? Uplifted beers had a reputation for violence and destruction, and Miss Ree couldn't deny her own visceral reaction to being this close to one. The deepest parts of her brain were screaming at her that she was in a confined space with a dangerous predator, and she should run away. Val grunted. Insider training. Miss Ree blinked. What? I was doing bodyguard work for this Verdani assemblyman. I overheard him talking about how one of the major shipbuilding companies was overextended and was likely to go under as soon as their next financial disclosures got released. I saw a chance to make a little money, so I shorted the corporation through an intermediary. I thought I did a decent job of covering my tracks, but some subroutine flagged the deal as a suspicious transaction. An investigator looked into me, and boom. They got me for illegal trading, which is usually just a fine, but since they seized my profits, I couldn't pay, and they gave me jail time instead. Miss Ree didn't say anything, and Val chuckled. You thought I pulled somebody's arms off or something, didn't you? Sorry, Miss Ree said. I don't know many uplifted bears, and I guess there's a reputation. I'll let you in on a secret, kid, Val said. Usually, it's enough just to look like you're going to rip somebody's arms off. What kind of work did you do for my uncle? Miss Ree said. I had some clerical duties, Val said, but mostly I ripped people's arms off. She yawned. You can drop me off in the diaspora. There's an asteroid settlement where one of my cousins lives. I can stay there while I figure out what to do next. I'm banned from working on verses for a while. Miss Ree cleared her throat. Brio didn't, tell you the situation? Val groaned. What situation? Why does there always have to be a situation? Brio explained the terms of the inheritance that she had to gather the old crew and complete Ando's final mission, and the bear was silent for a long time. What do you know about Ando's last ride? She finally asked. Not much, Miss Ree admitted. Breaking into some asteroid full of loot? I asked Brio about it, and he said there was no point going into the details unless I actually got the whole crew together, since otherwise there's no mission anyway. That job. It was ugly, Val said. Ando got a tip from a surveyor who had found an old pirate stronghold, halfway legendary. Nobody thought it was even real, a place called Hardheart. We did our due diligence, and the tip checked out, but it wasn't going to be an easy nut to crack even deserted. The asteroid had automated defenses, and who knows what kind of dangers on the inside. Ando loved a challenge, though, and the promise of a big payday. He was already rich, he owned his own asteroid, among other things. but he wanted to make one last big score, enough to set the whole crew up for life. Once we got started, though, everything kept falling apart. We were double-crossed by suppliers, attacked by pirates. We suffered all kinds of technical malfunctions on the ship, and with our equipment, it was driving Exo crazy, or crazier, trying to keep everything running. Once we actually got there, to the asteroid, the treasure trove, that stupid death trap of a vault, things got even worse. Val let out a low, deep sigh. It was like the whole expedition was cursed. Once we got out of the asteroid, alive if not intact, Endo wanted to try again, and we had a terrible argument. I said I was done with treasure hunting. I was going to settle down and get a nice, straight job. Which I did, but I'm just a little too crooked, so you see how that ended up. Now you want me to go back there? I want this ship. Misri ran her fingers lightly over the control panel. I think I'm in love with it. Ando was, too. He said the broken mirror was more than just a ship. It was part of the team. We were a good team, too. Until everything started going wrong. I don't know, Misri. You seem like a good kid, and I owe Endo a lot, but what's in it for you, right? Misri said. I get that. What do you want? Credits? I can pay. Brio could, anyway. Paying me is sort of the baseline bite size. I'd need a guaranteed fee, on top of profit sharing for whatever we recover from Hard Heart. But that's not enough. I can get paid anywhere. What about the Glade? Brio said, arriving to lean in the cockpit doorway. Val's ears moved. What about it? Ando bought it, Brio said, and you'll inherit it. If you help Misri complete her mission, that is. That old beast, Val said. She seemed stunned. What's the Glade? Misri asked. An asteroid, in the Dissapora, Brio said. Domed with a lush forest inside, a bit of natural wonder in the dark. Rather dirty and entirely too full of bugs. But Val seemed to like it. The one time we visited, we were doing work for the dreadful oligarch who owned the place. He used it as a sort of country retreat, kept it stocked for hunting and things. Ando bought that place? Val said. Just to bribe me into helping his niece? Yes, Brio said, shortly before he died. I see the plan worked. Val sighed. All right. I'm already preemptively regretting this, but count me in. Assuming you can get the others to agree. It will be nice to see Kikamayo again, I suppose. Do you think the other will agree to help too? Misri said. Depends on what Ando bribes them with, she said. What can you possibly offer Exodroid to make up for what he lost in Hard Heart last time? Before Brio could answer, &0 said, We have a problem. The cockpit board lit up with red lights, and an alarm howled, making Misri wince. What's going on? She shouted. Looks like that curse I mentioned, the bear said dolefully. Chapter 6. Complications. It appears the life support systems are failing, Brio said, peering at a readout on a wall screen. Not an urgent problem for me then, but perhaps you air breathers should. Misri shoved past the android, calling out to the ship's computer, Open the nearest port access panel. The jovial voice of &0 responded, Yes. Captain, in a way that Misri found quite gratifying, even though she was probably about to die. A section of bulkhead in the corridor ahead of her swung free, and with a swift turn, Misri was inside the walls of the broken mirror. In the service tunnels, the narrow crawlspace was lit by faint red light, and crisscrossed arrays of conduit, pipe, and cables pressed in on her from both sides. Status? She shouted. &0 said, Well, it's not good. We aren't producing breathable air anymore, so once you've inhaled everything that's floating around at the moment, you and Val will go into hypoxia. You'll get a headache, shortness of breath, elevated heart rate, some confusion, and of course, eventually. I get it. How long do I have? A fair bit of time. Really, no, actually. Wait. The air scrubbers are also offline, so that changes the math. Never mind, Misri said. She could put on an environment suit if it came to that, and buy herself some more time to work on the problem. But with luck, she slid down a ladder into the guts of the ship, following a line of conduit marked with blue dots until she reached the central air exchanger, festooned with dials and readouts. She stared at the monstrous tangle of hoses for a moment, then muttered, "Are you serious?" One of the hoses had come loose or been disconnected and was now flapping around loose, so she got that screwed back into place and secured with several wraps of tape, then reset the switches on the air scrubbers, which had all been flipped off. "Captain, you fixed it," the computer said. She looked around the life support hub, frowning, trying to figure out how this had happened. Maybe pressure had built up due to a clog in the system, making the hose pop free, and it had struck the switches. "All the switches, do you have eyes in here, &0? No visual or audio. No, just the sensors that reported the malfunction. I've been suffering cascading failures throughout my internal surveillance systems for a while now. Ando's death sort of threw my maintenance schedule off course, and it was never all that rigorous. I told Brio we should get my cameras fixed before we set off, but he said my, quote, voyeuristic impulses are not mission critical. I'm not a voyeur. I'm just a keen student of sapient nature. Keep the eyes you have open, Misri said. Something strange is going on here. She returned to the upper decks, where she found Val sitting at the big table in the galley, smearing vat-grown eel paste on crackers. Good job saving all our lives, since Val communicated via psychic projection. She didn't have to talk with her mouth full, so crumbs didn't spray everywhere, at least. But watching her eat was still disconcerting. Those teeth. Thanks. Miss Ree sat in a chair across from the bear and took a deep breath of clean air. Do you really think the ship is cursed? Like, not metaphorically, but actually? Val shrugged. It's one explanation. There are others, but none so elegant. Brio walked in, frowning. That was impressive, Miss Ree. I didn't realize you were so knowledgeable about the inner workings of void sweepers. Miss Ree shrugged. I read the manual and ran through some tutorials with &0. This is going to be my ship, so I need to know how it works. What a remarkable display of confidence. The android sat with them, smiling. It's almost a shame your mission is doomed to failure and you won't get to keep the ship. Why are you so sure I can't pull this off? Miss Ree demanded. Because Ando couldn't, with all his years of experience and knowledge. It's simple probability. Yeah, well, Ando was rich and comfortable. She leaned back in her chair. Never underestimate the motivational power of wretched poverty and desperation. Their next port of call was a scrapyard. The office and processing facilities were built into an asteroid, a fair-sized rock encrusted with shiny metal domes and protruding polygonal structures. But you could barely see the asteroid through the cloud of broken ships and fragments of machinery floating all around it, like flies buzzing around a hunk of rotten meat. This looks like the aftermath of a horrible space battle, Miss Ree said, gazing out through the cockpit window. In a way, it's the aftermath of several. Brio was in the co-pilot's seat, annoying her. The scrapyard buys up the wrecks of the losers from the winners, and either refurbishes them or breaks them down for parts. Exo is living in that one. The android pointed to a ship that was nearly spherical, slightly larger than the broken mirror, with a deep concavity on one side, where it had taken some tremendous impact. Miss Ree blinked. Exo lives in a wrecked spaceship? I gather the rent is quite reasonable, Brio said. Val lumbered in, filling the doorway, and said, Once on a planet. I knew a man who lived in a trailer in a garbage dump page. He spent his days digging through the mountains of trash for intact items to sell, and his evenings selling Chemjet-printed drugs to the locals. I'm not surprised Exo ended up living the same way. He needs someone to direct his energies toward more useful pursuits. That someone is supposed to be me? Misri said. The bear just grunted. Misri sighed. &0, can you figure out how to dock with that ship? I can, the computer said brightly. I can't promise Exo will open the airlock and let us in, though. The broken mirror eased through the drifting wreckage until it reached the side of Exo's ship opposite the giant dent, then extended clamps and attached itself to the hull. Hail him again? She said. Exo has declined the call, the computer said, as he has all our prior calls. Okay. Misri rose from the chair. Transmit this anyway. Hello, Exo. I'm Misri, Ando's niece. I need to talk to you. I understand you don't want to let us in, and while I respect your urge to be a weird hermit, this is urgent. We've got a ship designed for treasure hunting, which means breaking into stuff. Which means we have cutting torches, lasers, shaped charges, adamantine drills. Don't you dare put a scratch on my beautiful hull. A screechy voice burst onto the ship's PA. Open the door for me, and I won't have to, Misri said. You really are related to Ando, aren't you? The Asoki said. There was a long pause. Fine, the airlock is open. Come in, I'll hear you out. And then I'll throw you out, okay? I'll take it, Misri said. A crack could be widened. Brio rose to join her. Misri glanced at Val. Are you coming? I love Exo, Val said. He is my family. He has saved my life on 3 separate occasions. He is also exhausting. I'll see him soon enough, if you convince him to join us. Misri and Brio went to their own airlock and cycled through to Exo's, then stepped onto his ship. The walls were bare metal, the lights flickering and dim, and the artificial gravity was lighter there, giving every step a bit of extra bounce. Misri couldn't help but enjoy the sensation of lightness, doing a little leap and pirouette in the corridor. You seem cheerful, Brio said. Exo's reluctance and hostility don't plunge you into despair? I have faith in Ando, she said. Val didn't want to come either, and you turned her worldview around. You have some similar sweetener for Exo, don't you? I do have a bequest to offer, yes, Brio said, but Exo can be contrary. I can deal with contrary. They reached a central hub with corridors stretching in every direction, but a voice spoke down from above, up here. Misri tilted her head back. There was an open hatch in the ceiling, with a broken ladder that didn't come close to reaching the floor. She crouched and leapt, the low gravity giving her some extra lift, and snagged the last rung of the ladder. She clambered up into what looked like a technological spider's den, a dim spherical chamber filled with dangling loops and webs of wiring, and a figure moving in the center with entirely too many limbs. Are you Exo? Misri ducked under a hanging curtain of cables, getting closer to the center of the space. The Isoki turned in her direction. He wore a helmet with bug-eyed integrated goggles and a vest covered in pockets filled with small tools. His lower half vanished into some kind of chair with a dozen mechanical limbs, a few supporting him. The rest busily moving, plugging in cables, soldering circuits, and manipulating terminals on all sides. That's exothermic to you, he said. Only my friends call me Exo. I hope we can be friends. I'd like you to join my mission. Brio told me all about it. The swiftly moving limbs suddenly went still, and the Isoki turned his full attention on her. You want me to go back to Hardheart with you? No, thanks. I understand it's a place with painful memories for you, she said. Val told me how you, got injured. I didn't just get injured. My legs were sliced off. Exo pushed the faceplate of his helmet up, revealing a whiskered nose with a white stripe down the center and warm brown eyes. But you think that's why I don't want to go? I wish I'd lost my legs years ago, the prosthetics they have. These days are amazing. Look at this rig. He did a scuttling, twirling dance on his spidery limbs. Direct neural interface. Nah, I'm not dealing with unprocessed trauma or something. I don't wake up from nightmares about Hardheart, though I do have dreams about it. In fact, I have every intention of going back. That asteroid is too pretty to leave unplundered. And once my ship here is up and running, Hardheart will be my first stowpage. I'm just not going back with you. More specifically, I'm not going back with him. Exo pointed past her, and Miss returned to see Brio lurking among the cables. Nice to see you again, too, Exo, the android said. Chapter 7. Armaments. I didn't know there was a problem between you two. Miss Reed looked from Exo with his murderous glare to Brio with his amused smirk. The rat blames me for the failure of the mission, Brio said. Quite unreasonably, of course. After Ando lost consciousness and you assumed command, you pulled us out. Exo jabbed an accusatory finger toward him. I'd just blown the inner door. We were at the very center of Hardheart, and you forced a retreat. Why would I go back there with you? So we could run away at the last minute again? Ando needed medical care, Brio said calmly. Val was concussed. Your legs had just been sliced off. I decided it was better to keep us all alive than to die slightly deeper inside the asteroid. I don't expect gratitude for saving the crew, but it would be nice if you weren't actively hostile. Exo crossed his arms and scowled. When I heard you were running this expedition. Wait, Miss interrupted. Brio isn't running anything. I'm the captain here. Exo tilted his head. What? Brio told me he was the executor of the will, that he was shepherding you along, organizing everything? Miss turned and stared at the android. Who's captain here, Brio? You are. The android was totally expressionless, all smirking gone. Who makes the decisions about this mission? You do. If that's the case, why did you give Exo a different impression of the chain of command? Now Brio rolled his eyes. I am not responsible for the poor comprehension of ratfolk with impulse control issues, Captain. Exo jumps to conclusions as readily as he jumps into unstable wreckage. Misri sighed and turned back to Exo. Look, Brio has to come along. Ando put him in charge of making sure the terms of his will are executed properly. But that's his entire role. Observer, not shot caller. You wouldn't be working for him. This conversation would have gone better if you'd left him on the broken mirror, Exo said. Misri smiled. But then you wouldn't get to hear about the bequest Anda made for you, a little incentive to encourage you to help us out. Exo scuttled forward on his many legs. The old man left me something? Brio nodded. If you agree to help with our mission, you inherit his shares in the weapons factory on Versus. Those generate enough income to keep you in explosives and spare parts for the rest of your life. Exo shook his head. Boring. Pass. Andu thought you might respond that way, the android said, since practicality was never your strong point. With that in mind, he also offered a more personal gift, his cluster launcher. Exo went almost perfectly still, just his whiskers twitching. Does that include his collection of exotic rounds? Brio said. Oh, yes. 15 unidentified projectiles, collected over the course of Ando's long career, plucked from wrecks, hidden caches, black market bazaars, and illegal card games. Most of those rounds are of completely unknown provenance. Ando had no idea what any of them did. He was always afraid to let you near them, because he rightly assumed you'd blow up yourself, or his asteroid, or his hip, or all of the above. But now that beautiful collection of chaos can be yours. If you join us. I'm tempted. I won't say I'm not tempted. Exo turned toward Miss Ree. You say you're running things? But what happens if you get knocked unconscious? The android takes over again and flees for safety at the first hint of trouble? Miss Ree thought having your legs cut off was more than a hint of trouble, but she took Exo's larger point. She considered, but only for a moment. No. If I'm incapacitated, you take over. If you join us, I'll make you second in command. You'll be the ship's executive officer. Have you lost your senses? Brio didn't try to disguise his shock. You don't give a walking collection of unstable ordnance a leadership position. Miss Ree stood beside the Isoki, turning to look at Brio, arms crossed over her chest. So far, Exothermic seems to be the only one of you really committed to seeing this mission through. I can't think of anyone better to take over if something happens to me. She looked up at the rat who should have been shorter than she was, but instead had a few inches on her, thanks to his mechanical limbs. What do you say? The Isoki flipped his helmet faceplate down and looked at her through the faceted lenses. I say, call me Exo, Captain. Back on board the Broken Mirror, Ampersand Zero and Val were singing a song about little yellow flowers together. The bear sat unsteadily at the galley table, and when they walked in, she toasted them with a mug of something frothing, spilling a fair bit in the process. Miss Ree had never seen an intoxicated, uplifted bear before. At least Val seemed like a happy drunk rather than a mean one. Exo, the bear shouted telepathically, making Miss Ree wince. You joined us. Give me a bear hug, Exo said, dropping his duffel bag and toolbox on the deck and rushing forward, now on 2 legs. He'd swapped out his working legs for his traveling legs before coming aboard, citing unspecified past incidents as his reason for leaving the arachnoid prosthetic rig behind. I cannot give any other kind of hug, Val shouted, wrapping her arms around him and lifting him off the floor. I hope you know what you're doing, Brio murmured. She snorted. I doubt that. Why do you want me to fail, Brio? I don't want you to fail. I merely expect you to fail, and as a result, all this to ing and froing strikes me as a tremendous waste of time. Good thing you're getting paid then, Miss Ree snapped. Set a course for our next destination, would you? Brio snapped to attention. At once, Captain. He spun smartly and marched in the direction of the cockpit, precise and formal and sarcastic. Miss Ree sat down at the table. Though she refused Val's offer of a drink, the bear and the Isoki were drinking enough for everybody. I didn't even know we had alcohol on board. Ando was good about keeping the Broken Mirror stocked with the necessities, Exo said. Guns, explosives, and booze are the necessities, Val clarified. The force projector and autocannons are pretty nice, Miss Ree admitted. I don't mean the ship artillery, Exo said. I'm talking about the personal weapons. He leaned his organic half across the table, grinning at her. Brio didn't show you the old man's private reserve? The gun vault? She gritted her teeth. The android answers my questions, but he doesn't volunteer much. There's a gun vault? In the old man's cabin, Exo said. Is that where you're sleeping? I haven't been sleeping much anyway, she admitted. When I do grab some rack time, I usually just bed down in one of the empty crew cabins. The ones the Aslanti Star Empire stuck their soldiers and surveyors in? Val's telepathic tone conveyed incredulity. Those are just little metal boxes of sadness. You're the captain now. You should take the captain's quarters. Unless you want to give them to me, Exo said. I'll take them. No, Val's right, Miss Ree said. Sleeping there felt, I don't know, disrespectful or presumptuous or something. But Ando wants me to have this ship, right? She rose. Let's go take a look at this vault. The officers' quarters on Voidrunners were famously comfortable, and Ando's cabin was larger than Miss Ree's best squat back on Absalom Station. The walls were hung with colorful tapestries, tattered flags, and framed artifacts that doubtless held great sentimental value, if she only knew which sentiments. There was an actual bed round and luxurious a desk with an integrated terminal and a bathroom with both a sonic shower and a soaking tub you could fill with hot water. The wardrobe against the wall was still full of the old man's clothes, either rugged adventure gear or plush lounging comfort, with nothing in between. All the clothes were too big for her, of course, but she could disappear into one of those fluffy robes with great pleasure anyway. One wall was dominated by an immense circular seal bearing the skull and crossbones symbol of Besmara, god of pirates. I didn't know Ando was a worshipper. Of Besmara? Exo said. Not especially. He was pretty fond of Desna, the god of explorers and travelers, but who wants a giant butterfly symbol on their vault? It doesn't really scream dangerous and impenetrable. The skull and all, that's just how the vault was when Ando found it, Val said. He looted it off a wrecked pirate ship and had it installed here. Mystery walked toward the symbol and saw the thin seams running across it. How do I open it? It's biometrically locked, &0 said from a speaker in the ceiling. Ando used a dead pirate king's hand to open it and then rekey it to his own specs. Mystery wrinkled her nose. There'd better not be a severed hand in a desk drawer in here. The computer laughed. The will said you should have every available advantage, and the vault is one of them. So when you came on board, I scanned you and rekeyed the lock. Now you're the only one who can open it. Or someone who has your severed hand, Val corrected. I'm an advantage that Pirate King didn't possess, &0 said. I would disable the vault if I saw someone walk in carrying any of your body parts. So don't worry about that. I wasn't a minute ago, Mystery said. Here? She reached out her hand and touched the skull, right between its empty black eyes. The wall hummed and then split apart, the skull separating into 4 sections that folded away toward the corners. The space within was only as deep as a cabinet, but it was fully packed. Racks and shelves held weapons of various sorts, from blades to bludgeons to blasters. Mystery's eyes danced across a vintage dog slicer, a top-of-the-line arc rifle, a sonic cannon, a cryopike, a zero pistol, acid spewers, disintegrator rays, flamethrowers, and stranger things, with at least half a dozen exotic weapons she'd never seen before. You could outfit a small insurgency with the contents of this vault, she said. Ando did, occasionally, Val said, when the money was right. Mystery reached in, picked up a small flame pistol in a hideaway holster, and tucked it away at the small of her back. There were some knives there that made her ultra-thin switchblade look mundane, too. And she hesitated between a grind blade and a fang blade before thinking, why not both? And putting their sheaths on her belt, one on each side. She'd lost most of her good weapons when the up and out was seized, and it felt good to have a high degree of personal lethality again. Exo skittered forward, reaching out, then paused. May I? He nodded his head toward a launcher, outfitted with a shoulder mount, beside a rack of unusual projectiles, a black egg, a faceted bauble, a grenade with glowing green sigils inscribed on the sides, and a dozen more. Is that your inheritance? Mystery said. Of course, take it. Just don't fire it in the house, okay? Exo picked up the grenade launcher, making excited chattering sounds, and then something boomed, and the ship lurched hard to port, sending all of them tumbling to the deck in a tangle of flesh and metal. Chapter 8. Bug Fixes. Explosion in the starboard cargo bay, &0 said. Hull integrity compromised. Executive Officer Exo is on the job, the Isoki shouted. As he rose to his feet, an array of small servos deployed from within his cybernetic limbs, giving him the appearance of a furry, walking multi-tool. He ran out of the captain's quarters, leaving Val to help Mystery to her feet. &0, what happened? Mystery shouted. Were we attacked? Negative. I don't have working cameras in the cargo bay, but based on atmospheric sampling, I'd say some of the explosives down there detonated, perhaps due to improper storage. How bad is the damage? Misri said. Mostly cosmetic. The actual hole in the hull is fairly small, and EXO is coming down to weld a patch in place. I just don't understand how this happened, Captain. Brio purchased those explosives from a reputable dealer as part of our resupply before we picked you up on Absalom Station, and we've never had any problems with their packing protocols before. Cursed, the bear said. Where is Brio? In the cockpit, &0 said, currently sighing and wanting to know what all the fuss is about. Miss Ree made her way through the ship to the cargo bay. The doors to the bay were sealed, since there was still a hole exposed to vacuum on the other side, and she watched as the Isoki, encased in a force field protecting him against depressurization, deftly sealed the hole. His prosthetics apparently included integrated welding torches. The patch he put over the ragged tier was smooth and shiny, brighter than the surrounding bulkhead, which was blackened from the explosion. Scar tissue. When the light over the door went green, indicating that the bay was pressurized again, Miss Ree went in to look over the wreckage. Bits of exploded crate littered the floor, and some of their food supplies had been blown apart in the detonation too. But in all, it could have been much worse. EXO's integrated tools folded in on themselves and disappeared into his prosthetics. He ran one of his hands over the patch. I have to say, it's kind of nice cleaning up after an explosion that wasn't my fault. It's a novelty. Whose fault was it? Miss Ree asked pointedly. EXO shook his head. The explosives must have been stored improperly, or they were old and overly volatile. Who knows? Brio bought chemical explosives when he could have purchased plastic explosives. Instead, that stuff doesn't even blow up if you set it on fire or shoot at it. Only a detonator sets it off. The chemical stuff goes off if you shake it too hard. It's cheaper, though, which is probably what Brio cared about. Will you make sure everything else that might put a hole in the ship is properly secured? Miss Ree said. Executive Officer and Prime Minister of Things That Go Boom, at your service, EXO said. That's the moon where Kikamio was last seen, Brio said. The planet below the moon was a dead husk, its surface seared into uninhabitability by some ancient conflict. But the large moon was all aswirl with clouds, offering tantalizing glimpses of blue and green beneath its known locally as Farmarone. There's no native intelligent life, and it hasn't yet been claimed by any extant interstellar organization. Apparently, a few survey teams went in years ago and never came back, and the assumption is that there's hostile flora, or fauna, or both. Why would a Shuren mystic come to an unsurveyed planet? Miss Ree asked. Kikamio has always been interested in overlooked, forgotten, and shunned places, Val said from her seat at the back of the cockpit. He follows the convergences of strange energies wherever they take him, basking in the wonders of the universe and all the surprises it holds. That's a little vague, Miss Ree said. Kikamio is a little vague, Brio said. I've never met anyone so entirely driven by intuition, whimsy, whim, and impulse. Ah, but he has a sense for treasure, Val said. Cameo is the one who found Hardheart for us, sniffing it out based on a mention in a corrupted database, recovered from a wreck, putting that together with hints about something special, hidden in that sector, using those strange senses of his to bring us close enough for the sensors to detect the unusual structures in the asteroid. He named the place, too. Kikamio insisted there was something remarkable beyond that last door, the one we opened just before Brio ordered our retreat. Some source of power. Ando trusted his judgment in such matters. Miss Ree, and you should too. I'll concede the insect has a sense for the otherworldly and extraordinary. Brio sniffed. I can detect magnetic fields and radiation, personally. But you don't see me dressing in robes and calling myself a master of cosmic forces. I can't wait to meet him, Miss Ree said. It's a big moon, though. Any idea where we should start looking? I'm searching for life signs, and there are lots of them. This place is teeming. Val leaned forward to punch a button on the console, then shouted, "Exo!" The Isoki was down in the engine room, tinkering, and trying to head off any new malfunctions or disasters. His voice crackled over the ship's comm systems. Yes? Is it time to explode things? No, but do you still have your cameo detector? Exo chuckled and said, I'll be right up. I'd better make some room. Brio rose and departed the cockpit. A few moments later, Exo sidled in. He held a large green metal box with a dark glass bulb onto page. I found this under my bunk, from the last time we needed it. What is it? Miss Ree said. Do a slow orbit around the planet and I'll show you. Exo extended long antennae from the top of the box and twisted a couple of old-fashioned dials on the front. The bulb began to flicker in brief, irregular orange flashes. Still works. So, the thing about Kikamio is, he wanders off. Once, at a spaceport, he accidentally boarded the wrong ship, Val said. When we were on that planet with all the chasms, remember? We had to tie a rope between you and him, Val, so he wouldn't fall into a hole? Miss Ree shook her head, adjusting the ship's controls to keep them spinning around the planet without dipping into its atmosphere. I thought Kikamio was the person who led you to treasures. How does someone like that get lost? Kikamio is very good at finding things on the macro scale, Exo said. He'll follow mysterious lines of force to wonderful things and point you to the right system, the right planet, even the right sector. But on the micro level, he could get lost on his way from the galley to his cabin. He doesn't really see what's around him, you know. His extra senses are operating on all sorts of higher levels, and the mundane ones, like sight and sound and hearing, can get overwhelmed or ignored because they're so much less interesting. The upshot is, Ando got tired of Cameo falling into ditches all the time, so we got him chipped. Val said. There's a tracking device on him? Miss Ree said. I made it myself, Exo said. The range is limited, of course, but if we pass close enough there... The bulb flickered green, just briefly. Get us down into the atmosphere, Captain, and do a flyby of that island. Miss Ree nosed the broken mirror down into the clouds, the mottled brown and green below them coming closer and resolving into forested hills. The light on the tracker flickered more often, and for longer, and Exo translated that information into course adjustments. They finally passed over a hillside with an overgrown cave mouth in the side, and the light glowed steady and strong. Kikamio is in there, Exo said as they swept past. His body, anyway, Val said dolefully. You really think the local fauna would eat him? Exo said. He's so chitinous. Crunchy outside, gooey inside, Val said. There's nowhere to land nearby, Miss Ree said. Too heavily forested. You could always drop some bombs and clear a landing zone, Exo said, entirely too enthusiastically. I might burn the whole forest down, and Kikamio with it, Miss Ree said. It is impossible to live without risk, Exo responded as though he'd said the phrase many times before. Instead of following her Exo's advice, Miss Ree found a rocky plateau about 2 miles from the cave and sat down there. Then she assembled the crew in the galley, around the large table. The most natural meeting place on the ship. Brio, you should come with me. You're less likely to get eaten, since you're not digestible. He smirked. That is one of my many fine qualities, yes. Val, I know you miss trees, so I assume you'd like to come along? Oh, good, the bear said. I was afraid you'd want me to stay here, and then I'd have to make tedious threats until you agreed to bring me with you. Besides, I'd rather you didn't die. You remind me of the old man too much. Miss Ree smiled. If you had to have a crew, you could do worse than having someone like Val on it. Miss Ree had been watching her own back for so long. She'd forgotten what it was like to have someone else watching it too. Exo, I'd like you to stay with the ship, just in case there's any really big fauna on this moon. His nose twitched. I was hoping to try out my new grenade launcher, boss. Feel free, just keep the ship in sight and aim away from the direction we're going, okay? The atmosphere outside was breathable, so there was no need for cumbersome suits. Miss Ree checked her weapons and made sure Val's large pack contained adequate survival gear. They didn't know exactly what they'd find in that cave. But it was good to have ropes and lights and medical supplies and bottled air, just in case. They stepped off the ship, and Miss Ree breathed deep, crisp, clean, moist air. She hadn't been in nature for a long time, or spent much time in gravity wells at all, really, since leaving home. The clouds above were gray, tinged with silver, and the forest was a wall of green and mist. All in all, she thought she preferred Absalom Station, but the variety was nice. Val led the way, the tracker dangling around her neck on a leather straw page. She swung a machete, sized to her proportions, to clear away the vines and branches. The bear radiated contentment. Once they got deeper into the forest, her heroic bushwhacking efforts weren't really necessary. The trees were towering sentinels, and the thick canopy up above blocked the light and discouraged undergrowth. There were occasional patches of blue and white mushrooms, but otherwise, the experience was almost like walking through a dark hall, filled with pillars. Why did Kikamio come here, do you think? Miss Ree said. Is there some remnant of a lost civilization here, maybe? She was imagining a cave that led to an underground metropolis filled with precious metals and priceless artifacts. If they made a big score here, maybe she could buy off Brio. Surely a lawyer like him could be bribed. If you had enough to bribe him with, it wouldn't surprise me. Brio strolled along beside her. He walked through a patch of those mushrooms, and when his boots crushed their caps, a thick cloud of spores swirled up, so thick they fully obscured Miss Ree's vision. She waved her hands and coughed, her mouth and nostrils full of fungal motes, and fell to her knees, dizzy. When she lifted her eyes, blinking, the forest was gone, and she was somewhere else entirely. Chapter 9. Witness. Miss Ree looked around, baffled. She was standing in a tunnel, dark stone walls pressing in on both sides. Maybe the mushrooms had knocked her out, and Val had carried her to the caves? Val was there, up ahead, but now she was dressed in shimmering, overlapping plates of armor, an immense two-handed rifle strapped to her back. Brio stood beside her, dressed in a shiny black jumpsuit of some kind, and Exo, wearing prosthetic legs that looked just like real legs. Why wasn't he back with the ship? "Hey," she called. "What's going on?" The three of them ignored her, talking in a huddle. She stumbled in their direction, then stopped to blow mushroom dust out of her nostrils. Her vision swam with spots and blurred, and the rock wall seemed to shimmer, replaced by trees for a moment, before firming up again. Up close, she could see that her crewmates had been through some kind of hardship. Page Val's armor was smeared with blood and darker fluids, and Brio's fancy jumpsuit was torn. One of his hands was gone, replaced with the mouth of a cannon, its barrel glowing a steady orange. Exo had a gash down one arm, clumsily wrapped in a rag. Val stomped on ahead, deeper into the tunnel, and with her out of the way, Miss Ree could see the rest of the party, previously hidden by her body. The Shurin in the black and silver robes had to be Kikamio. They'd found him. But who was the old guy in the armored spacesuit? The stranger glanced in her direction, and Miss Ree gasped. It wasn't a stranger. It was her Uncle Ando, older than he'd been at the funeral. More lines, whiter hair, but with the same mischievous glint in his eye, the same twinkle and zest for life that he'd been barely able to suppress, even for a mournful occasion. Uncle! She shouted. I thought you were dead. Ando didn't reply or take notice of her at all, just turned to Kikamio. Anything nasty waiting for us up ahead? The Shiren closed his eyes and swayed slightly. More constructs, I think. Gross. Exo hefted a long staff a cryopike, Misri thought. But why was there a chain blade mounted on the end? That Isoki really did enjoy customizing things. Freezing them has been pretty successful so far, but I've only got a couple of charges left in this thing. My hammer has infinite charges. Val boomed from up ahead. I'd like to point out that we've been on this asteroid for most of a day and have yet to find anything valuable. Brio sounded bored. Just death traps and horrible monsters. And clapped the android on the back so hard that Brio stumbled. But Ando didn't seem to notice the poisonous, yellow-eyed glare he received from the android in return. Nobody puts that many death traps and monsters inside a big rock unless they're protecting something really valuable. Misri walked up to Brio and poked him in the arm. He felt real enough, but he didn't react to her. She put both hands on the android's arm and pushed, but it was like leaning into a wall. She sighed and stepped back. All right, so this is some kind of vision. Hopefully not just a fantasy my mind is creating to entertain me while I succumb to mushroom poisoning. I can't imagine my dying brain would force me to spend my last moments with Brio anyway. The party moved down the corridor and joined Val, who stood before a round stone door, 10 feet in diameter, etched around its circumference with symbols a sword, a dragon, a coin, an intricate multi-pointed star, and a group of wavy lines that might have been meant to indicate wind or waves. We have to touch the symbols, maybe in some kind of pattern? Ando said. Kikamio, do you have any sense? Val roared, hefted her hammer, and smashed it into the center of the door. The hammer bounced off without leaving a mark. After a moment of silence, Ando continued. So, Kikamio, any ideas? The Shiren stepped to the door and reached out, pressing hands to the wall, eyes closed, head tilted. How do I open you? He murmured, and then cocked his head, as if listening and Misri thought she heard a whispering voice in reply, too faint for her to comprehend. She shivered. She'd heard mystics had spooky capabilities, but she'd never seen them in action before. Kikamayo pressed the symbols on the door sword. Wind, dragon, star, coin, and a deep, grinding sound accompanied the door's movement as it rolled into the wall. Beyond, the space was dark, except for floating spots of shimmering blue light. Crystals? Eldritch flames? Misri couldn't tell. The mystic stepped back. Things lurk beyond the threshold. Don't they always? Ando said. He reached into a bag slung at his waist and drew out a flare. He cracked off the end, and the cylinder pulsed with blinding light before he tossed it into the room beyond. Misri gasped as the falling light revealed things clinging to the walls and ceiling of the cavern beyond. That glowing blue was their eyes, and there had to be a dozen of the creatures. They looked like immense spiders or crabs, almost as big as she was, but their limbs gleamed like metal. Val, care to lead the way? Anda had a pistol in each hand now. Val rushed in, hammer grasped tight in her massive paws, roaring. Ando came right after her, Brio at his side, cannon arm raised. Kikamio and Exo followed, one breaking left, the other right. Misri stood in the doorway and watched an intricate dance of violence. The constructs, things of bone and chitin and metal, presumably created by some horrible fusion of necromancy and technology, leapt from the walls. Bladed arms slashing, and even though they couldn't see her, it was all Misri could do to stand her ground in the presence of such ferocity. Ando's crew was fearless, though, and more than that, they worked in beautiful concert. Ando and Brio stood back to back, sending blasts of energy unerringly at the glowing eyes of the beasts, shattering their bodies. Exo sprayed a construct with supercooled vapor, slowing it down and frosting it in white, giving Val a clear shot to smash it into fragments with her hammer. Kikamio gestured, using some kind of telekinesis or gravity manipulation to fling constructs through the air into the path of the weapons of his fellows. When Exo's cryopike ran out of icy ammunition, he flicked a lever, and the chain blade on the end shifted into place, whirring. The mystic flung constructs his way into the buzzing teeth like they were playing stick and ball. Miss Ree had spent time on a team before with a girl she'd loved, even at least until realizing Elio was only capable of loving herself, but her experience had never been like this. Her old crew had been full of bickering, score settling over trivial grudges, ambitions acting in opposition to one another, constant frustration and conflict. But Ando's crew, she marveled at the effortless synergy of motion, the absolute trust, the anticipation of needs, and the meeting of those needs. For the first time, she grasped the power of what Ando was trying to offer her. She hadn't been invited to join another squabbling, temporary alliance. She'd been invited to join a whole that was greater than its parts. The crew gathered together in the center of the cavern. "Is that all of them?" Ando asked, standing in the midst of wreckage. The mystic shook his head. "I sense something more, something bigger, but in the next chamber, perhaps? The source of power I've been tracking, it's closer, too. I think we're near the heart of this place. No symbols on this door." Val tapped her hammer against the wall. To Miss Ree, it didn't look like a door at all, just a rock someone had shoved against the mouth of a tunnel from the other side. "Doesn't seem very smash-able. I think this is your area, Exo." "Boom, boom, boom," the Isoki said cheerfully. He rummaged in his pack, found a drill, and bored holes into the stone at wide intervals. After drilling several of those, he shoved cylinders of explosive into each cavity, humming to himself as he chained together wires. "We should probably back up," he said. They retreated into the corridor where Miss Ree had first awakened. Materialized? They stood on either side of the round doorway, safe from the blast zone. Miss Ree decided to stand right in the center. Though, how often did you get to watch something like this without fear of being blown to bits? "Boom!" Exo yelled and pressed a detonator. Miss Ree winced at the concussive wave of sound and slit her eyes against the flash of brightness. Bits of hot stone pattered all around her, but none caused her pain. She squinted in the swirling smoke, trying to see what was beyond the opening Exo had made, what was at the heart of Hard Heart. A huge rock came flying out of the opening, and Miss Ree instinctively flung herself to one side. The rock sailed through the door, and Kikamio screamed, "Val!" Chapter 10. Kikamio. Miss Ree sat up and looked toward the tunnel. Val was laid out on her back, the hurled boulder on the ground next to her head, with Kikamio crouched beside her. The bear was groaning, so she was alive, but she wasn't responding to the mystic's urgent questions. A grinding, scraping noise behind her made Miss Ree look back into the chamber. Something huge was forcing itself through the hole Exo had made. The newcomer was kin to the constructs they'd fought before, but bigger. With a pale humanoid torso perched atop spidery legs, she was reminded of the Isoki's multi-limbed prostheses, and realized with a chill that she was about to see how he'd lost his legs. In place of a head, this thing had some sort of cannon, swiveling to and fro, and its arms ended in blades. Exo ran past her, shrieking, chain blade raised, and the construct lashed out with one of its many legs, scything through the air. Exo's battle cry turned into a scream of pain as the construct sliced off his legs, clean and easy, with some kind of molecular blade. Miss Ree scuttled backward against the wall and watched in horror as Ando ran into the chamber, screaming Exo's name, only to take a beam of energy from the thing's cannon head right to the chest. Ando dropped to the ground, and suddenly Brio was there, moving fast. He blasted his arm cannon at the ceiling above the construct, raining rock down upon the thing, staggering it with multiple impacts. He used that time to pick up Exo and carry him, like a child, out of the cavern. Kikamio rushed in too, and when the construct swiveled its cannon head in his direction, he gestured, performing some mystic trick that made the construct stumble and lose track of its targets, swiveling the cannon to and fro. Kikamio used that moment to get hold of Ando and drag him out of immediate harm's way, too. Miss Ree's vision blurred. The cavern was briefly replaced by the blurry green of leaves, and a face drifted across her vision, a Shuren's face. She shook her head, wanting to see what happened next, and turned away from the construct to the crew in the corridor. Brio shouted, "Retreat!" back to the ship. He carried Exo, who moaned in nearly incoherent protest, and Kikamio carried Ando, with Val staggering along behind them, bumping into the walls. The construct was right there, though, and surely wouldn't remain confused for long. How could they possibly escape? A grenade arced through the air, bounced, and rolled between Miss Ree's feet. She looked down at it. Ah, that's how. The grenade went off, and everything went white, and then green. Oh, hello. You are awake now. The Shuren beamed down at Miss Ree, multifaceted eyes glittering. Kikamio? Miss Ree groaned. She was in a room full of white light, neither cavern nor forest wait. Was this the medical bay of the broken mirror? How did I get here? I heard the explosion's Exo playing with his new toy, the Shuren said. I came to investigate, and found you and Val in the throes of visions. Brio was there too, but he is less vulnerable to mind-altering substances. There is no rapid antidote to the spores, I'm afraid, so we just brought you and Val back until you recovered. She's fine. She is much larger than you, and was farther from the spores, and so she received a lighter dose. Miss Ree expected a hangover, or a headache, or something, but she felt fine. What was that? What happened to me? The Shuren perched on a bench beside her. I came to this place to study the local mushrooms. They have psychoactive properties for many humanoids, though they affect different species to different degrees, apparently. Humans are especially vulnerable. Drink this. Kikamio handed her a cup, and she sipped it carefully. Just water, but she was suddenly aware of how dry her mouth was. The Shuren patted her on the shoulder companionably. Those things I saw, she said. They seemed so real. They were just hallucinations? Not exactly. Some mystics have the ability to share their memories with others, or to peer into someone else's memories, and some can even make those memories manifest in the form of holograms that anyone can see. The mushrooms cause a similar effect, but more powerful and immersive. Those who ingest the spores can access the memories of several different people, all at once, and even stitch together composite visions where shared memories overlap page. Though the spores proved deadly for the first visitors to the planet, I thought I might be able to harness their powers to enhance my own abilities. They're potent, all right, Miss Ree said, but I don't seem to be hurt. Why did the surveyors die? Am I fatally poisoned and just don't know it? No, Kikamio said. Not everyone is as adept at navigating psychic landscapes as I am, unfortunately. The surveyors triggered the mushrooms and got lost in their visions, and either starved to death or were killed by local wildlife. The mushrooms, of course, thrive on corpses. The mystic shrugged. Nature is a wondrous thing. May I ask, if you don't mind, what did you see? Hard heart, Miss Ree said. The end of your expedition. Kikamio nodded. Yes. You had access to Val's memories, and mine when I came close enough, and possibly even a few of Brio's, though androids are resistant to psychic effects. Your vision was very convincing, I'm sure. I'm sorry you had to see all that. In a way, though, I suppose we've met already. You know me from the memories, and I feel I know you from Ando's stories. What stories? Miss Ree frowned. I only met Ando once. He kept track of you, though. He did not talk to your family much, but he had contacts on your homeworld, and on Absalom Station and elsewhere, and followed your exploits. He planned to ask you to take over the broken mirror when he retired, but Kikamio sighed. We didn't realize the extent of the harm the construct did to Ando with that energy blast. The cannon fired some variety of exotic radiation and caused cellular damage we didn't detect until it was too late. Ando was saddened by the end of his own life, but he was sadder at seeing our fellowship so badly broken. That's why he wanted me to bring you all together again, Miss Ree said, to try to heal what happened on that asteroid, to make his crew whole again. Kikamio nodded. True, but that's not all. He wanted to make you part of the crew. He worried, I think, that you were so alone. I didn't understand before how you all were, how you could be. But what I saw, what I experienced, I do now. She looked into his glittering eyes. Will you join us? Of course, he said. What kind of person would I be if I didn't respect an old man's dying wishes? Brio didn't even have to bribe you. He didn't have to, Kikamio said. But I didn't let him know that. Ando's bequest to me was just a favor. Anything his estate could provide. The old man knew my desires at any given moment are hard to predict. So Brio is sending a team with appropriate air filters to harvest the mushrooms for me, and setting me up with a growing facility. I think the therapeutic uses for the spores could be considerable, and there are recreational possibilities, too, to truly live through your favorite memories again, or live in someone else's. I will grow a remarkable garden. If we survive Hardheart, anyway. That's our next stop, Miss Ree said. I hope we make it there before the curse gets us. Kikamio made a clicking sound. There is no curse. At Val's request, I have checked the ship thoroughly. I detect no energies, no presences, nothing twisting probability. She was sure there was a curse last time, too, when things went wrong, and I also found no sign of any interference. Could these problems be just ordinary bad luck? I guess they must be, Miss Ree said, but she wondered. She gathered the crew in the galley again, the whole crew, for the first time. We're on our way to Hardheart, she said. I've gone over all the records from the mission, and of course, thanks to Kikamio's mushrooms, I have a more, direct sense of what to expect. We know what we're up against this time, at least better than you did the first time. She looked around the table, taking a moment to look each of them in the eye. I know I'm not Andu. I don't have the history with you that he did. I don't have his long experience. I won't pretend I can slot neatly into the team or fill the space he left behind. But I want to complete this mission, his mission, and I'll do everything I can to make sure it succeeds. Of course you will, Brio said. You want to be rich. Miss Ree shook her head. There are lots of ways to get rich, Brio. I want luck. Ando saw something in me. Something that reminded him of himself, maybe. I want to live up to that. I want to make the old man proud, even if he's not around to appreciate it. He's giving me a chance here, and it's not a chance I intend to waste. That said, she took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I looked over the terms of Ando's will and had &0 confirm my understanding. Those bequests the old man offered you, all the terms require you to join my crew and follow my orders. That means if I decided we weren't going to Hardheart and told you all to go your separate ways, you'd still receive your rewards. Right, Brio. That is a reasonable reading of the text. The android seemed more alert than usual. Miss Ree spread her hands. Consider yourselves released then. You can take your riches and go home. Chapter 11. Brio. What are you doing? Brio said. If you release the crew, you get nothing. Even if you go to Hardheart on your own, that's not what Ando's will requires. All of us have to. I know that, Miss Ree said. I've been giving this whole situation a lot of thought. And after what I saw in that vision, I don't want to drag you all to a place full of bad memories. If you're going just because you've been bribed or coerced, I don't think we'll succeed anyway. I saw how you all work together as a team, and that kind of collaboration is the only way something like this can work. If you want to join me, do so freely. If you don't, I'll get my ride back to Absalom Station, and I won't be any worse off than I was before. She would be better off, in fact, because her understanding of what a team could be had changed. Exo, Val, and Kikamio exchanged glances. I never wanted to leave Hardheart in the first place, Exo said. So I appreciate the offer, but I'm going there anyway, and I'd rather do it with all of you than by myself. That thing in Hardheart threw a rock at me, Val said. I want a rematch. I am still very curious about the powerful energies I sensed at the center of that asteroid, Kikamio said. I would like to see this through as well. Plus, it's what Ando wanted, and I owe the old man a lot. This woman is just manipulating you, Brio said. She's pretending to care about your feelings and wishes, knowing that will ingratiate you to her more deeply. She's just trying to win your loyalty. I don't say that as a criticism, it's a sound strategy, but I hate to see you all taken in by it. I believe she is sincere, Kikamio said. Brio rose. Fine. I, of course, get no vote here, since I'm compelled by my agreement with Ando to see this mission through to the end, until Miss Ree gives up, fails, or unlikely as it seems succeeds. He shook his head. Back into a dirty hole full of monsters then. He stormed off. Don't take it personally, Val rumbled. He's always like that. Ando really trusted him though, huh? Miss Ree said. Kikamio made a hum sound, the most insectile sound she'd heard from the Shurin. Well, Ando trusted that Brio would do what he was hired to do. Exo nodded. The old man always said, Brio will obey the letter of his contract. But you'd better write that contract carefully, because that's all you can count on. Really? Miss Ree's understanding of the crew's dynamics realigned. I thought Brio and Ando were old friends. Ando saw his value, Val said. I'm not sure friendship entered into it. Kikamio nodded. Ando could be the indulgent, fun uncle, while he had Brio there to play the disciplinarian. Even though Brio was only ever doing what Ando told him to do. It must be hard on Brio, I always thought. Miss Ree said. It's a long ride to Hardheart. I'm going to get some rest. Back in her cabin, she queried &0. Tell me, she said. What happens to Ando's estate if I just totally fail in my mission? The computer explained. Miss Ree called an all-hands meeting, once more in the galley, which seemed appropriate. This was more like family business than business. Once the crew was gathered, looking at her attentively, except for Kikamio, there were limits, after all. She said, I need you to stop being jerks to Brio. Exo and Val glanced at each other. Brio looked stunned, and Kikamio hummed happily to himself. Not so much you, Miss Ree said to the Shurin. But you two. Exo, I saw what happened on Hardheart. Brio is the main reason you're all still alive. He distracted that construct. Carried you to safety, and even threw that last grenade to cover the retreat. Brio, you saved me? Exo blinked. I assumed. You never said. I wasn't looking for thanks, Brio said stiffly. Sure, but I thought. His nose wrinkled, whiskers waving. I'm sorry. I owe you, Brio. The android shrugged minutely. Think nothing of it. Miss Ree turned to Val. And you! You barely talk to Brio, except to give him static, when he's the one who got you out of prison. The bear ducked her huge head. I don't mean anything by it. That's just how we are. It's our dynamic. I give him a hard time. And he... She trailed off, solves your problems for you? Miss Ree said. When you put it that way, I can see how it's maybe less fun for him than it is for me. Val reached across the table, and after a moment, Brio put his palms in hers. I appreciate all the stuff you do for us. I know you probably do all kinds of things I don't even notice. Like how there's always honey in the pantry that's you. It's a simple matter to update the supply lists with the crew's preferences. Brio was looking down at the table. It hardly requires thanks. It's just good for morale. He took his hand back from her. Well, still, she said. Sorry, Captain. Brio does get the short end a lot. I can't promise to be sweetness and light from here I am who I am, but I'll try to spread around the sour darkness a little more, all right? Good enough, Miss Ree said. You can get back to what you were doing before. The crew departed, except Brio, who looked at her for a long moment. Why did you do that? Miss Ree glanced at the ceiling. Can I get a little privacy, &0? Once the ship confirmed it wasn't listening, she said, I was trying to figure out why you were sabotaging the broken mirror. Brio didn't react at all, but his stillness was watchful. She went on. I looked over the terms of Ando's will more closely. I thought maybe there was some provision where you'd inherit everything if I failed, but there's not. If I don't return from Hardheart, his estate just gets divided up and given to a bunch of charities. So I knew you weren't trying to mess things up for money. That meant your reasons had to be personal. Then I noticed. Ando didn't leave you anything. No bequests, no great heart's desire, nothing like he gave the others. Ando treated the rest of the crew like family, but you. I was his employee, Brio said. We all started out that way, but the others. Ando warmed to them. I even understand why. You've spent enough time with the others to see it. They're good at their jobs, great, even but they're a mess. EXO has no impulse control. Val will drink her wages away if she isn't given structure. Kikamio could get lost in a bathroom. Ando felt like a parent to them, doting and indulgent and always there to catch them when they fell. I never needed his help, Paige. What's worse, he didn't want to damage his relationships by giving them bad news. So that became my job. Ando was kind of a mess himself, too, I guess. Brio clenched his fists. As a general rule, androids didn't show a lot of emotion. Miss Ree knew that didn't mean they didn't feel any. I was the one who caught Ando when he fell. I saved him from bankruptcy, made his flights of fancy into workable plans. I think he resented me for that, on some level, perhaps not even consciously. I worked for him, but I was never part of his little family, like the others were. He bowed his head. I resented Ando, too. I didn't want to make his last ridiculous flight of fancy go off perfectly. I wanted him to fail, even if he wasn't around to realize it. It's ridiculous, but I was so angry with him. That is some excellent grudge holding, Brio, Miss Ree said. I say that as someone who can nurse a grievance with the best of them. The android smiled just faintly. Then he closed his eyes. The sabotage. How did you know it was me? The life support stuff happened when you and I were the only ones on board, and you spent some time alone just before the alarms started to sound. The little explosion, likewise, happened not long after you'd left the room. You chose not to fix all the ship's interior cameras, allowing you to move without detection. Val's whole thing about there being a curse threw me off, but Kikamio said there was nothing like that happening, so... I'm not a great detective or anything, but I can connect a few dots. I just wanted to disrupt the mission, Miss Ree, discourage you, make you give up. I never would have allowed you to be hurt. Miss Ree waved that away. I know. You could have killed me on Absalom Station and just said you found me dead. You could have arranged a fatal accident on board the ship anytime. I knew there was something more complicated going on. He nodded. I was done with all my interference anyway. After you offered to let the crew walk away with their bequests, I started to like you. You're a good captain. That's good to hear. Now was the crucial moment. Can I be your captain? Brio blinked at her. You'd still have me, after everything I did? If you'll stop screwing things up on purpose, yes, you're an asset. And unlike the old man, I can promise to properly appreciate you. Yes, Miss Ree. I'd like that. She clapped her hands together. Great. Then let's go to Hardheart and do something the old man couldn't. The broken mirror moved slowly through a dense asteroid field, its sensors baffled in every direction by rocks ranging in size from pebbles to behemoths, almost as big as Absalom Station. There were signs of some half-hearted attempts at mining on the outskirts, dead signal beacons, abandoned domes, floating equipment, but the pickings must have been too poor to sustain interest, because once their ship had pushed deeper toward the center of the cloud of stones, there was no indication anyone else had ever been there. Miss Ree began to understand how a treasure like Hardheart had stayed hidden for some untold number of years. There it is. Kikamayo pointed through the viewport toward an asteroid that, apart from its relative immensity, didn't differ noticeably from its nearest neighbors. The entry hatch was camouflaged, but we dug out the rock around it, and you can still see the hole. Now that he mentioned it, Miss Reed did see a shadow on the surface. How did you ever find this place? Kikamiyo shrugged. I'm good at patterns. Take a reference to a place of power and danger in a corrupted database on an old wreck. Add a rumor of strange sensor readings reported on a mining forum. Do some flybys. Feel for the shift in cosmic energy. Get EXO to blow a few holes in rocks and look inside. It's an art. We still don't know what's hidden away in there, but it's something. It's a pirate vault, Val said. That's what Ando thought. Treasure hidden away until the heat died down. Defenses put in place. But then the pirates died and never came back to claim the loot. There's no way to figure out the provenance at this point, so legitimate salvage. Maybe, Kikamiyo said. All I know is there's something powerful at the center of that stone. The broken mirror drifted closer until Hardheart filled the viewport. Transfer complete, &0 chirped. Miss Ree frowned. What? Brio just authorized the transfer of the estate, &0 said. You are now the owner of all your late Uncle Ando's assets. Brio sidled into the doorway. Spirit aside, the letter of the will only states that you have to gather the old crew together and return to Hardheart. He nodded toward the rock that filled the viewport. As executor, I deem those obligations fulfilled. What happens next is up to you. Miss Ree could just fly away, drop off the crew wherever they wanted, and live off the old man's estate. The idea was tempting. Hardheart was trouble, and she was good, historically, at running away from trouble. The crew waited to see what she'd decide. No, that was wrong. Her crew waited. Everyone suit up, Miss Ree said. Time to break this rock's heart. Chapter 12. Hardheart. The crew crowded into a tiny landing shuttle and made the crossing to Hardheart. The shuttle docked neatly atop the hole they'd opened on their last visit, and EXO rigged up the temporary airlock to connect their ship to the asteroid's hat. There's atmosphere and artificial gravity inside Hardheart, Brio said, adjusting settings on his arm cannon. Somebody lived in Hardheart. Once upon a time we found plates, cups, tables, chairs, all ancient but suggestive of humanoid occupation. No sleeping quarters, though. We probably just didn't get in far enough. Val tucked her hammer onto her belt. I bet the master bedroom is at the core. The pirate captain, or whatever, kept his booty close to his bed. Miss Ree had her flame pistol on one hip, and her cryogun on the other, and a fang blade and grind blade sheathed on straps across her chest. What kind of resistance do you think we should expect? We fought our way in pretty deep last time, Val said. I can't imagine there's much left to smash. We might just stroll right to the final door. Ready, EXO said from the door. He was using his bipedal prosthetics, and he had the grenade launcher he'd inherited on his back, with the exotic grenades on a bandolier. Do not collapse this whole place on top of us with that thing. Miss Ree pointed to his launcher. I wish it was that easy to blow Hardheart into pieces, Exo said. Then I would have just blasted a shaft straight to the middle and avoided all that fighting in corridors. This old rock is tough, both by nature and through all kinds of esoteric reinforcement. They opened the airlock and clambered into the asteroid, Miss Ree taking the lead. They jammed into the narrow shaft as Exo hacked the asteroid's outer hatch. The doors slid open with a squeal, and they all shuffled into an airlock built like a cylinder tipped on its side. Exo went to the controls, sealing the outer doors behind them. Machinery hummed and chugged in the walls. Miss Ree didn't usually get claustrophobic, she'd spent too much time on space stations for that. But she wasn't usually jammed in with an android, an uplifted bear, a Yusoki, a Shurin, and all their various armaments. Miss Ree took a deep breath and tried to focus on the achievement. They were here. They were on Hardheart. Miss Ree's heart thumped, and she remembered something she'd read once, about how fear and excitement were basically identical in humans. Physiologically speaking, the difference was mostly one of perception. She decided to aim for 70% excited, 30% scared. Just enough of the latter to keep her from getting into trouble. She was about to ask Kikamio if he sensed anything waiting for them, when they heard a thump and clatter beyond the airlock. Let's open that door just a crack and peek through, okay? She said. Exo operated the panel, and the airlock door slid quietly open wide enough for Miss Ree to peer through. She knew from the map Brio had drawn that the airlock led to a narrow corridor, then to a large circular room with 3 passages branching off, 2 leading to unremarkable chambers, 1 leading deeper into the asteroid's complex depth. She looked down the corridor toward the open room and saw a flicker of movement there, though she couldn't make out details. Exo, before we wander in there, can you do a little remote viewing for us? Exo reached into a pack and drew out a drone about the size of Miss Ree's hand, all scuttling legs and bristling sensors. It slipped through the crack and zipped down the hall. Exo projected a hologram from a gadget on his wrist, and they got a projected image of the drone's view. The drone stopped at the entry to the chamber, and a moment later, something immense passed across its field of vision. A scarred humanoid torso with a cannon perched where the head should be, scuttling around on a number of bladed legs, though it dragged 2 of them behind, twisted and broken. It was the guardian Miss Ree had seen in her vision, the one that took Exo's legs. How is that thing still alive? Brio said. It's not, Kikamio said. It's a combination of animated body parts and technological. My language was imprecise, Brio said. I meant, how is it not a bunch of exploded fragments? I threw a grenade at it. Looks like you did some damage, anyway, Exo said. How about this time I use a better grenade? He held up a mottled green orb, one of Ando's exotic armaments. Do you even know what that thing does? Miss Ree said. Nope, he said cheerfully. I know what all our other weapons do, though, and I know they're not sufficient to kill that thing. So we can try to attack it with something that definitely won't work, or we can take a chance on something that might. I feel as though I should object, Brio said, but I can't actually find a flaw in his logic. Miss Ree nodded. Okay, let's give it a try. Exo eased the door open wide enough to aim the nose of his grenade launcher through, then adjusted the targeting system, consulting the view provided by his drone. Fire or something more interesting than fire in the hole, he said, and launched the green projectile. There was a whump on launch, and then he pulled the weapon back inside and sealed the doors. Miss Ree braced for an explosion and a burst of light from the drone's feed, but neither happened. The construct reared back when the projectile struck and spun around on its legs in search of the source of the attack. But there was no boom. Was the round a dud? Miss Ree whispered. Then one of the construct's arms fell off. The creature spun again, cannon swiveling, but it didn't notice the stealthy little drone. Another arm fell off. A black blotch started to spread across its fleshy chest, like a necrotizing rash. Was the grenade full of nanites? Exo mused. Disassemblers? Or some kind of acid? Kikamio crowded in to peer at the image. No, the flesh is rotting, but the metal is rusting and the bone is turning to dust. I think that grenade was some kind of entropic bomb, causing everything in its blast radius to decay. The construct's cannon fell off, thumping to the ground. I think it's safe to go in now, Misri said. Exo opened the door, and Misri led the way to the central chamber. The fearsome construct was now nothing but a heap of meat and rust and fragments. Misri kicked the cannon into a corner and grinned. All right, she said, we're probably all clear from. A dozen crab spider metal bone things came scurrying out of a tunnel, and Misri watched in awe as her crew sprang into action, moving with the same grace and teamwork they'd displayed in her vision. But this time, after a brief hesitation, she joined their dance. They effortlessly shifted to include her. She froze the creatures with her cryo-pistol, preparing them for Val to smash, and jetted flame from her other gun to startle them into the path of Brio's cannon, while Exo gleefully laid into the constructs with a chain blade, and Kikamio smashed them with a staff, and spun them through the air with his esoteric techniques. Within moments, the constructs were demolished, and her crew drew together in the center of the room. Val clapped Misri on the shoulder. You can fight. Good to know. Brio examined one of the broken things. These little bone bots have fewer limbs than those we fought last time, and not as many weapons. I think they were the dregs, the cast-offs, the last line of defense. Val hefted her hammer. Maybe so, but keep your cannon ready anyway. They proceeded into the depths of Hardheart, past many signs of the group's earlier incursion's scorch marks on the walls and shattered constructs in the corners, until they reached the smashed-up chamber where they'd been stopped last time. Misri thought she saw one of Exo's legs poking out from a pile of rubble, but didn't look too closely. They all stood and looked at the hole in the wall Exo had blown before the big construct drove them away. Unexplored territory through there, Misri said. Send in the drone? Exo complied. He looked at the projection, then at Misri. I think we found the guy who used to live here. Misri stepped through the opening, but not, after all, into the innermost chamber of the asteroid. This was more of an anteroom, lined with shelves that held various supplies. But the most interesting thing in the space was a dead technomancer, on the floor not far from an imposing barred metal door. Exo crouched down beside the humanoid corpse, well preserved in the sterile depths of the asteroid, but still clearly dead for a long time. The body was heavily augmented, half its face metal, left eye replaced by a cluster of lenses, with a pair of mechanical limbs, multi-jointed, grafted beneath his biological ones. He wore dark blue robes, decorated with golden threads of wire. The most likely cause of death was a 4-inch diameter hole in his chest, the cloth around it stained with blood and some black fluid. A trail of blood led from his body, ending at an imposing metal door just a few feet away. Whatever bad thing had happened to him had taken place on the other side. The others followed her in. Brio and Val looked over the door, heavy and solid, sealed from the outside by a dense metal bar set across the door's width and slotted into brackets on either side. Exo and Kikamio were more interested in the corpse. He's been dead a long time, Kikamio said. I can't extract any useful information from what's left of him. Exo pulled a wire from the array of machinery strapped to his chest and plugged it into a silver gauntlet on one of the dead man's arms. The lights on the gauntlet blinked from red to green, and Exo grunted. It looks like he ran the whole asteroid from this terminal, including the sentries we've been killing, though they were set on fully autonomous defense mode. From what I can tell, He used his dying moments to put Hard Heart into full lockdown. He really wanted to keep people out, but maybe not because he was protecting treasure. Then why? Miss Ree looked at the barred door. What happened to him in there? We had a disagreement, a slithering voice whispered in Miss Ree's head. Miss Ree looked at her companions, eyes wide. Kikamayo's mouth parts wiggled, Exo's nose twitched, and Brio cocked his head and banged the heel of his hand against his ear, like he was having trouble hearing. "Did you hear something?" Val said. "Or was it just me?" "I've been alone so long," the voice said. Something about its tones undulated in Miss Ree's mind. "I have been so lonely." "Kikamiyo, where is that voice coming from?" Miss Ree said. The Shurin put a hand against the door. "The source of the power I sensed. It's beyond this door, and it's alive. It's not treasure, Captain. It's alien, extraplanar maybe, or from the depths of unknown space. But there's more to it than that. Something happened to this creature." "I was lost in the dark," the voice said, dark humor glimmering in every word. "I fell through a hole in my world, into the void of yours. I floated in the blackness. There is so much empty space here. It's not like that where I came from. Back home, it's teeming. You crawl and you eat and you climb and you knot yourself up with the rest. This place isn't a vault, is it?" Brio said. "It's a prison. Hyperbias found me." The thing beyond the door said. "He thought I was dying. He tried to save me with his strange little ways. He did not understand that. I was just hungry." Miss Ree ran. Chapter 13. Miss Ree? Miss Ree stopped running when she didn't hear the hammering of other footsteps behind her. She paused in the hallway beyond the rubble-strewn chamber, cursed, and called back, "Come on! We don't want anything to do with whatever's locked in here." The only answer she received was a strangled groan that sounded like it came from Exo, and a weak projection from Val, getting tired, can't move. She took a few steps back until she could see into the anteroom. Val was slumped against the wall next to the technomancer's body, and Kikamiyo was sprawled on the ground, one hand twitching. Exo writhed on the ground, clawing at his implants, and kicking out wildly with his prosthetic legs. And Brio. Brio was simultaneously trying to lift the bar that sealed the door with one hand, and trying to hold the bar down with his other hand. The thing behind the door spoke in Miss Ree's mind again. But fainter now, it couldn't project very far, it seemed. Sweet life to drain, yes. Delicious things and toys to play with, too. Hyperbias showed me how, fields and emanations. "It's trying to control my bodily systems," Brio said through his clenched jaw. He was trying to drag himself away from the door, but his legs weren't cooperating. Or rather, only one of them was. I think it did seize control of Exo's implants, and as for Val and Kikamiyo, it's draining their life force or something. Miss Ree didn't feel drained. Was she out of range? Or did the thing beyond the door only have the power to affect so many people at a time, and she was one beyond the limit? For whatever reason, she was free, and that meant she had options. One option sprang to the front of her mind. She could turn back around and keep running. She was good at running. She could return to the ship and flee this place, and never look back. Her mind was quick to offer justifications for that option. She barely knew these people. Brio had actively tried to sabotage her. They were probably too far gone to save anyway. The most important thing was to save herself. Walking back in there would just mean all of them would die instead of most of them, and what sense did that make? There was a time when she would have given in to fear and pragmatism and done just that. But these people had joined her. They'd followed her orders. They'd followed her into Hard Heart without hesitation, despite how badly this place had battered them last time. She'd inherited more than just Ando's estate. She'd inherited the loyalty of this crew. and she might be able to keep it if she proved herself worthy. The mystery who solved her problems by running away from them didn't seem to live here anymore. She did run, but back into the anteroom, dropping to her knees and sliding the last few feet toward Exo. The grenade launcher was on his chest, attached by a strap, and she popped the clips loose and wrenched the weapon free. Something started tickling at the edges of her mind. Feather light touches, and a gray fog started to creep in from the edges of her vision. The thing beyond the door was capable of draining one more humanoid after all, it seemed. Her limbs and eyelids grew heavy, but Misri bit down on her tongue, hard, and the spike of pain returned some clarity. The exotic grenades were in a bandolier slung across Exo's chest, and she briefly hesitated, wondering which one to grab, but there was no way to tell what any of the grenades did anyway. So why not take the prettiest? One looked like it was full of black liquid, speckled with bits of glitter, like stars in the void. That looked like freedom to her. She snatched up the round and loaded it into the launcher. Those feathery touches at the edge of her mind returned, and the thing beyond the door said, "Shh. It's all right. You'll like it here inside me. It's teeming. Open the door, Brio," she shouted, pointing the launcher at him. Without hesitation, the android stopped fighting himself and yanked the bar off the door, flinging the length of heavy metal aside. The door swung outward with sufficient force to knock Brio out of the way, slamming him into the adjacent wall, and clearing her line of sight to the door. Misri didn't have fancy targeting tech, and she'd never fired a grenade launcher before. If the projectile exploded, she thought there was a good chance the blast or shrapnel would blow back out the door and strike her too. Her crew, her friends, were probably safe, protected by the thick walls on either side of the open door. Well, she'd never expected to get old like her Uncle Ando had anyway. Her arms were growing heavy again, and the gray was pressing in, but Misri had sufficient strength to depress the trigger and launch the mysterious projectile through the open door. There was a pop as the round launched, but no subsequent explosion. The gray fog encroaching on Misri lessened, though, and then subsided entirely. Exo stopped thrashing and groaned, and Val and Kikamio stirred. Brio peeled himself off the wall and joined Misri in peering through the dark doorway. What happened? She shook her head. I don't know. Was it some kind of, instant death grenade? Check on the others. I'll take a look. Misri put down the grenade launcher and stepped toward the door. The final chamber was black. Can I get some lights? She called. One sec, Exo called as he stood back up. I think I saw controls on the dead guy's gauntlet. Lights flooded the chamber and Misri blinked, then took in the space. And the thing at the center of the space. The technomancer's chamber was a large oblong room, the walls covered in cables and conduit. The space was mostly a workshop or laboratory, full of machinery, cluttered tables, shelves crowded with components, and racks of tools. It was also his living quarters, with a bunk against one wall and an alcove that held a shelf full of cans and a water tank. A raised table dominated the center of the space, with bright lights arranged to shine down on it. Some kind of operating theater. And the target of the operation, strapped to the table, was a thing. Misri had been to an aquaculture facility in the depths of Absalom Station once, where they farmed fish and other underwater creatures to feed the lucky ones on the upper levels. One tank had held a bunch of tentacled creatures, all bulbous bodies and wriggling interweaving pseudopods, and the thing on the table was a bit like that, but bigger. Its body was less like a bulb and more like a flower, with a mouth at the center, open and full of curving needles in lieu of teeth. A profusion of tentacles spread out all around that central disc circumference. The creature's color shifted as she watched, slowly going from dark green to rich red to bruised purple, the colors moving across its limbs in waves. Some of the arms were as small as Miss Ree's little finger, and others were as big around as Val's upper arms. The tentacles waved but slowly, like they were tendrils drifting underwater, moving with a current. The voice spoke in her head again, but it was unintelligible. A slow, endless drone. I-ow. I-you-woo-woo. The creature was bound to the table with metal loops and canvas straps and various chains, and when Miss Ree got closer, though still well outside the range of its longest tentacles, she realized the technomancer had been experimenting on this aberration. There were shining bits of metal implanted around its mouth, and gleaming rings set into some of its pseudopods, and crystals embedded here and there in its flesh, blinking like telltale lights. The technomancer who made Hard Heart home must have found this thing out in the void, an accidental traveler or exile from another plane, or maybe from somewhere in the dark tapestry where such horrors were said to dwell. Rather than burning the abomination to vapor, the fool had tried to augment the entity, or bring it back to life, or find a way to control it. And he'd gotten a hole in his chest for his trouble. He's also apparently granted this thing the ability to seize control of technological implants, in addition to what Miss Ree assumed was its native capacity to drain life force. Ando's weird grenade had done something to the abomination. Stopped it from controlling their implants or eating their life, muddled or confused it. But how? And how long would this last? The creature has been slowed, Kikamio said, joining her, limping a little. The grenade created a field that slowed down everything in its blast radius. We must look like flitting insects to this monster right now, moving impossibly fast. But the effect will wear off eventually, and once the beast starts moving at full speed again. "Exo," Miss Ree called. "Give me all your explosives." The Isoki came in, opening up his knapsack. "Wait, when you say all," she pointed at the thing's gaping horror maw. "They go in there," Val grunted. "I like this plan. Is it moving faster?" "I think it's moving faster," Bria said. The voice in Miss Ree's head returned, still slow, but comprehensible now. "Make an arrangement. Power, pain, revenge. All this. For you. If you, I have everything I need." Miss Ree took the satchel full of charges from Exo, darted forward, and crammed the sack into the thing's dark mouth, careful of its needles. A tentacle started to drift toward her, and she drew her fang blade and pressed its buzzing edge against the meaty pseudopod until it slowly recoiled, oozing some foul fluid that made her eyes sting. She danced away from the thing, back to her crew. "You can blow all those from the ship?" she asked. "I wouldn't want to detonate that many explosives from any closer, boss," he said. "Then let's get out of here." They paused long enough in the anteroom to shut the door and bar it, then fled. Miss Ree looked briefly at the dead technomancer Hyperbias, but his home was as good a grave as any. Getting out of Hard Heart was a lot faster than getting in had been. They'd gone slowly and carefully then, on the lookout for defenses and traps. But this time, it was just a headlong rush to safety. They clambered back into the shuttle and detached the temporary airlock. Once they were on their way back to the broken mirror, Exo called up his holographic projector. He'd left a drone in the technomancer's lab, and they watched the thing on the table begin to speed up, reaching tentacles into its open mouth to grab the explosives. "Now," Miss Ree said. Exo punched a button, and the holographic view flared bright white, and then blinked out. Miss Ree looked through the viewport toward Hard Heart, and saw gouts of rock and smoke burst forth from hidden exhaust ports and weak spots in the asteroid's skin. The kick of the escaping gases made the whole asteroid lurch and, slowly, ponderously, start to spin. They all watched silently for a moment. Then Kikamio said, "Listen. In my defense, there was something exotic and powerful at the center of that asteroid, just like I promised. I never said it wasn't a horrible abomination from the dark between the stars, or the underside of the universe. We didn't come away with anything of value, Brio said. This mission was a total loss. He shook his head. Ando would have thought this was hilarious. At least I got to try out my fancy grenades, Exo said. Curse, Val said gloomily. We didn't make it out with nothing of value, Miss Ree said. What? Our lives? Brio said. We had those to begin with. Miss Ree shook her head. I meant more. We had that experience together, all of us, and she didn't know how to say what she wanted to say. She'd never had to articulate feelings like this: belonging, trust, togetherness, respect to anyone before. It changed things. It changed me, and she trailed off. After a moment, Exo cleared his throat. Right. So, boss, what's the next job? She stared at him. What? You're the captain, Brio said. You decide where we go from here. Though I wouldn't mind a little downtime before we crawl into the next terrifying ball of monsters. Yeah, I don't get paid enough to make those kind of decisions, Val said. That's why you get the big bed, Miss Ree. Wake me up when you know where we're going. Or better yet, just wake me when we get there. She lay down on the floor of the shuttle. I did come across something interesting in my reading recently, Kikamio said. I'm sure the dangers mentioned in the account are exaggerated. Brio groaned. Can't we take a nice, simple little courier job? &0 spoke over the communications channel. I could really use the tender ministrations of a good mechanic, Captain. I still have all these grenades left, Exo said. How am I supposed to use them on a courier job, Brio? I am trying to sleep here, Val rumbled. Miss Ree sat back in the pilot's chair and looked over her company, and for once, she didn't even think about running away.